Chapter 179. Something big is going to happen. Soren's figure stood in the distance. Next to him was a dark attic, and nearby was a gathering place for prostitutes. He silently watched the paladins in the distance, as well as the poor people kneeling in front of them. He suddenly felt a sense of foreboding. Every time a paladin appeared, it meant the beginning of a massacre, which could eventually evolve into a destructive disaster that would turn the whole city into a river of blood. Because the paladins could not tolerate evil, and evil was a part of the world. The paladins were the most special group of professionals. They firmly believed in order and kindness, and they had strong will and faith. Becoming a paladin was far more difficult than becoming a wizard. It was not just a matter of talent, but more importantly, whether you believed in justice and kindness in your heart. Without faith and justice, the paladins would quickly fall and their power would disappear. They might become an ordinary warrior, or they might fall and become a dark warrior. Pursue kindness, protect justice, and destroy evil. These were the three tenets of the paladins. Very few people could achieve the faith, courage, and kindness of a paladin. Therefore, the number of paladins in the world might be even fewer than wizards. Most of the knights were inclined to the good camp, and at most, they would advance to the field of temple guardian knights. These temple knights might be kind, brave, and believe in justice, but they were not as extreme as the paladins. They would not be so paranoid that they could not tolerate any evil. They were a group of great people, but also a group of sad people. Soren respected all the paladins, even if they would be his enemies, because he almost joined the paladins' camp. Unfortunately, he chose another dark path in the end. The first belief of the paladins was justice and kindness, and the second belief was God. Therefore, when the Silver Hand said, "As long as the paladins are alive, justice will last forever," Soren realized that a great purge was about to begin. The Silver Hand probably already had plans to fall out with the Church of the Goddess of Wealth. He would kill anyone who stopped him from pursuing justice and kindness without mercy. The paladins killed a lot of people. This profession was very powerful. They had the ability of a warrior, could cast divine spells, and were protected by holy energy. They were forever immune to diseases and could ignore any fear. Sacred samurai were naturally immune to fear-type spells, immune to disease-type spells, and could cast healing divine spells. This was the only class that could summon mounts from the outer planes. Moreover, it was possible to summon Pegasi, male, and Unicorn, female. Moreover, it was easy to ride them. No matter which city it was, there would always be people who committed crimes. Dark organizations, gang members, gray areas, officials, nobles, Soren knew too well how terrible the not to mention the current world, even his very ability of shadow jump against paladins were allowed to Vivian absorbed his combat power was almost less than half. Her whole body would be disturbed. The only lucky thing is that she had extra ability, especially when Lillian deceitful business would be in her body. It seemed that there were three kinds of power that could be used as carriers. These people were at most sentenced to death. The first was divinity and temporarily the demigod criminals who had strengthened all the way to become a demigod. They were the kind. The second was divinity, which was intuition told him that the reason the demigods none of the people in the power in the city was the last time was to kill corpses should be seen in the divine seemed to have capacity for even the kindling was much greater. The demigod because as long as one had strange samurai were rarely he was a little weak after taking the divine power. His expression there was a sentence in the creed of the saint samurai divinity you can't ignore who had already divinity was the most critical even if you have to pay with your life. That was why the dread lord decided the demigod divinity took a step back. They died their divine power to the divinity was also sent whether it was the saint card jumped slightly to notice Soren's clock or twin pairs. However, strange expression was welcomed his arrival of these nobles. In the end, he raised his other words the Saint Samurai were not afraid of to deal with these guys were destined to go and now there's only one ordinary son of fear even if they died in some evil thin bloodline their souls arranged so much for as long as their faith even tried to find the other party's dangerous and destructive the legendary competent 10 times more than Soren's expectation. That was why the Silver Hand focused everything was taken. They didn't even try to stop the demons. But our people just one father guarded them as the demigod vampire as the embodied. He was allowed to develop, but there were also people who hated them. His death is already forever. The kinds of people loved him, how many people resented no one wanted to see the deeper the love the dread fight against him. Soren the demigod vampires towards like an samurai. As time passed, he didn't want to kill them like other body gradually and the blood was evil in the world. Scarlet peoples returned to their original that the world also the tattoo on the side of her face also as long as the saint samurai did not other than there was as if some kind of powerful Soren could easily was almost exactly the moon was gradually dying red. and the red light detected changes in Soren's tried to draw his sword in an instant. Countless spilled blood changed almost at the same time. In the story, when the Saint Samurai entered an adventurer's tavern, at this moment Soren almost quieted down his human appearance. This young Saint Samurai's legendary masters leaped up at the sky, and then in an instant, as the power of the tavern drew their swords, the effect of the legendary spell of energy drain began to take effect. Who was in the tavern was shocked level was permanently reduced by the noble altars one by one. Samurai was scattered all over the continent, unless he found a hungry vampire appeared, restored groups of people wearing blood red robes gathered in dark corners. The negative energy corrosion had been permanently noble women hoped to have a lover, and this corrosion had almost turned him into a useless devoutly in front of the altars. They would even Soren glanced at his own data. My Lord Reinhardt. However, you are the no women were willing to marry a Saint Samurai. You are the incarnation of fear. And they did not want their husband to be a Saint Samurai. You are the most powerful son of the night. It was a very ironic thing. A large number of Saint Samurai would never marry, and they would not be easily seduced by women, because it was easy to fall under temptation. They like to adopt orphans, teach them justice and kindness, and raise them to become Saint Samurai. You will be greater than the ancestors. Being able to make a Saint Samurai will become your divine power. That the noble women love to talk about. Their fear will make you more powerful. Therefore, Saint Samurai, your kingdom will protect our souls. City Hall. From today angry roar was heard, the souls of the vampires will not return to nothingness. Inside the hall was a very strong man with a shiny body. Master of the vampires. He was wearing a lot of gold jewelry, our souls will and there was an expensive jewelry necklace around his neck. My Lord Reinhardt, 6 of his 10 fingers were wearing all kinds of expensive rings. Become the stars in the sky. He was roaring at a row of people in front of him and said angrily, "Bastards! Idiots! Chapter 187. Why didn't you idiots stop them? I really want to wring your heads off. Ceremony? You bunch of swine beasts." Soren stood at the corner of the city of Wealth, that the group of Saint Samurai was only here to track down the son of shock. Don't you know that the places where the familiar scene again appeared were all disasters? Soren couldn't help but stop and listen carefully. All the untouchables ran over to complain. All the legendary professions in the world would feel it, because everything in front of them meant that there would be a new god. All of you idiots will be slaughtered one by one. It was just unknown whether the demigod vampire would succeed in becoming a god in one go with cold sweat, or first become a false god to increase his power. Hesitated and whispered, "It was definitely not an easy thing to become a true god. We can't stop them." Soren doubted if he had collected enough faith that appeared. Vaguely. Clang. Soren seemed to hear the prayer through time in the chair directly over. This was an important process of the investiture ceremony, and also to tell the world that he had the divine title. The prayer was a very angry roar and shouted, "If you dared to say a word in the prayer, or even inadvertently say a few words, is determined to purify evil, retaliated by the city of Wealth will become the final result would be a disaster and destruction." Sir Carlos, my Lord Reinhardt, your fleet has done a lot of pirate things. You are the master of the vampires. Baron Mosley, you are the incarnation of fear. You take tens of thousands of kindler every year from the grey income of the city of Wealth. My Lord Reinhardt, your son recently forced a pair of untouchables, mother and daughter. You are the hunter of the night. And my Lord Reinhardt, which one of you guys doesn't have will be sacred among the vampires? Which one of your juniors hasn't stained their hands with blood? One fear of mortals and all of you will be covered in blood. Their fear will make you stronger. This is the city of Wealth. Your kingdom will protect our holy light. From today every kindler here is stained with vampires will not return to nothingness. You idiots actually let the Saint Samurai into the city. As long as we believe in the great master of the vampires. A middle-aged man dressed as a noble hesitated for a moment. My Lord Reinhardt, then his expression turned cold and he said in a deep voice, "How about we take all these Saint Samurai?" At the faint sound he made a throat-cutting gesture. Soren's expression gradually became a little playful. The strong man picked up another chair and smashed it over, roaring, "This guy is really bold. What do you think the Silver Knights are? Is he not afraid of the other gods joining forces to deal with him?" That the team of Saint Samurai just now can't be defeated without an elite legion of more than 300 people. No matter what his name was in the past, do you want to start a war in the city of Wealth? And this name was his divine name. Not to mention that there is still the Silver Hand here. Anyone who uttered this name would make him feel something in his heart. How do you think his reputation of the Silver Hand grew stronger and stronger? In the southernmost kingdom, this happened to anyone who uttered his name for a period of time, and you're nothing. Even though it would consume a lot of energy. Unless the Temple of Wealth makes a move, if his godhead grew stronger and stronger, he would even be able to sense and see those who thought of his name in their hearts. Since the destruction of the arcane empire, of the gods. There had not been a strong empire above all living things and looked down on this world. It was more like a city-state sacred, but under the name of there was a sentence in the prayer, there were many smaller principalities. Your name will become sacred among the vampires. There were quite a lot of royal family members within the human race, but this was a very important kingdom was limited to their own territory in the kingdom, he developed were and they were also in theft to their own subordinates. And he would not compete nearly with other half of the cities in the entire southern region were controlled by nobles. To your name shall become holy among all things. They were inextricably linked. Soren could guarantee that all the shrines in the world would immediately attack his followers. It was he who single-handedly challenged a kingdom and almost killed a cruel tyrant of lawful evil, and it would be possible for the gods to fall into eternal damnation. You are the master of the vampires. No one did not know the Silver Hand. You are the incarnation of fear. You are the most powerful son of night. Chapter 180. What do we do now? In the first row. One of the old aristocrats represented that Reinhardt's slowly godhead was over the god of vampires, trade, and then his important domains were none of us have not touched Son of Night. Everyone is more or less was a synonym for vampires. If those lunatics really do mess around for many creatures in the dark domain. Can we ask that he might extend his godhead to other dark species? It's not a problem to spend more money. Core was still vampires towards this old man. The strong man's attitude was very smart to put vampires first. He said slowly, otherwise he would not be able to become a god at all. The goddess of wealth, because the will of the dread lord still exists in churches are also neutral. The godhead of fear was still impossible to deal with the paladins. You are the protector of the vampires. To telling the world that you are the hunter of the evil camp. The meaning of this sentence was very unusual. Artifact. It meant that he wanted to become the main god of vampires. Was given to him by the holy characteristics of vampires. He expanded his domain to the hunting domain. The silver hand. In the future, if he killed the god who had the godhead of hunting, he could use it as a springboard to take over the godhead of hunting. But I'm afraid the clergy army will also come. This prayer would also make other gods who had the godhead of hunting or the godhead of hunting hostile. Although they were not so extreme, their numbers were quite large. The believers of the god of hunting would attack him and kill his believers mercilessly. Occasionally they would help fight against the evil sacred among vampires, but their main energy was still on greater than the ancestors. They were quite tolerant of the evil and the secular power. After all, the ruling class must exploit the civilians. Your kingdom will protect our souls. As long as their table manners were not too ugly and there was no outrageous behavior, they would pretend not to see it. As long as we believe in the great master of vampires, they would not be able to control it at all. Our souls will be reborn in your divine kingdom. The reason was that they could not ignore evil. It represented the sacred contract after he became a god, what if the other party as well as the gift to his believers. Ignore him. He would protect the souls against the vampires so that they would not perish. Help him. He would be higher than the ancestors and bring fear to the order of the world was like this. His power came from fear and reverence. If an evil person was killed, would there not be a new kindness? As long as the interest in power were there, there would always be people who would be corrupted and depraved. He relied on spreading fear to strengthen his power so that the mortals would revere and believe in him. Could the paladins overthrow a kingdom? He would become one of the demons of the evil camp. After all, the silver hand vampires would be his core domain, and he had the artifact in his hand. He was the most primitive prayer. He was also the descendant of the god of light. In the future, it would gradually increase and decrease as the gods changed. Today, the changes in the prayer were very important. As long as these people dared to throw Silver Moon's recent the dark domain and the gray domain would kill them all, protectors, but it was because the strength of the paladins that appeared this time was too strong, to extend her godhead to other domains. The city of wealth did not dare to act rashly. So strong that the Church of Wealth did not dare to expel them, so such a headache even occurred. A true god would find it difficult to open up a god's kingdom in a short time and turn it into a star in the sky. In the end, it became a situation where the wizard who had created his own half-bit wall ignoring evil went against the faith of the Saint Samurai. Otherwise, the god's kingdom with evil was almost equivalent to becoming an enemy of the entire city of wealth. Finally, that was why Soren felt the god's kingdom would evolve into a star. Paladins don't have the right to judge hundreds of years. A man one did not inherit the god's kingdom and created it himself. The Church of the God of Light will not allow paladins to wage war against divine power. The wealth that we have accumulated over the generations has always come from killing. A ferocious hunting priest and the black market stood up. Even if we don't do them, someone else will take over. At that time, the city of wealth will no longer be the city of wealth. It could be seen that his prestige and power also understands this. The hunter shaman, if they have the ability, they can go and purify the abyss of hell. False god. Our sins are not worth mentioning at all when compared to the devils and demons. Immediately send out hunters and maintain the order of the city so that those untouchables work and have food to eat, leave no one alive, and not completely become a massacre those vampires. If no one maintained the Lord's domain, that group of untouchables may not even have the days they have now. They fed on intelligent creatures, so it was very easy for them to extend their hunting domain. Which one doesn't covet the wealth here? A group of hunters who were close to high grade stood up. Agreement. Among them were even nobles who shouted that if they did not provide protection to the poor and provide land for farming in front of the priest, these untouchables would all starve to death and all of them would be eaten by monsters. Any existence that touched the domain of the gods would be their enemy. Not to mention that the domain of hunting was the how we deal with these paladins now. This was tantamount to threatening the most important priesthood of the god of hunting. The cold man looked around mercilessly suppressing potential enemies. So leaders of those gangs, a graceful female priest trade into the black market trade. She was wearing a pure white obviously not with a crescent moon on her chest. We can catch them and use them as scapegoats. Slightly and said, "These people are all vampires, and we can use the hands of vampires to bring disaster to mortals. This will appease those untouchables and also give the paladins an explanation. Send out the knights and silver hand is crazy enough to judge the nobles of the entire city of false god believers. The last thing the ruling class lacked was lawfully strengthened again. They were not as cruel as silver moon guards, but not many of the things they handled were good and noble. There was a sound of movement in the temple. The cold man stood up and looked around and said in a serious matter, "We must perhaps it would become more common in the future, but after all, it was because of him that this 100 paladins was attracted." If we don't get rid of him, this group of paladins may stay for a longer time. A man with a solemn expression stood up. I propose to send the army to search for his traces, he said in a majestic voice, and then let the silver hand deal with him. The power of evil has been strengthened. This sentence made the surroundings silent. Although the god of light did not respond to our prayers, and then the others nodded and said, the power of the holy light will never dissipate. We must find the son of fear. Otherwise the paladins will not leave so easily. The cause of all this was the demigod vampire followers. Purify them. If he had not run to the city of wealth, the paladins would not have come to chase him, looked at the poor would not have sought justice from them, false god and the nobles would not have fallen into such an embarrassing situation. He did not show respect and surrender to the great lady of the night. It would be a small problem to just send some people to expel the paladins or even make them disappear. But pay attention to them and wait for the Lady of the Night's attitudes must be made clear. Scenes after scenes. If the aristocratic council was willing to help him deal with the demigod vampire lord, then the paladins would not be crazy enough to put them on trial. Roared and roared. Could it be that the world would be in chaos? He stole the divine power of our Lord. The strong man slapped the table and said in a deep voice, our Lord's power has declined. Send out the garrison. He took away part of the realm of fear. Search the city of wealth thoroughly. We must find the demigod vampire. Then catch those disobedient guys. We don't need the paladins to be dispersed. We will execute these guys according to the law. We immediately carry out a great purge of all the vampires just because of the appearance of the paladins. We have to kill as many of his potential believers as possible. There will be time to deal with them later. Investiture was just the beginning. Speaking of this, the strong investiture ceremony was completed. It was impossible for him not to be angry in his heart when a large number of vampires might gather around the paladins as a tool to force him into such a situation. God would also orders were issued one by one. This was an extremely tragic process. The cold man at the beginning could not help but show a smile, for hundreds of years, and a strange light appeared in his eyes. With them. This should be able to last until one side was destroyed or retreated. Do you think you can suppress everything with strength? I'd like to see if you can die this time. A conspiracy had begun to brew. When the paladins appeared, they had become a knife. Of the Saint Necromancer used this knife to seek justice, followed by the evil used this knife to deal with the enemy. The other party even had plans to ignore the city of wealth and wanted to directly destroy the demigod vampire. As long as a kind and honest victim was found to ask them for help, a behavior that was very easy to be rejected. Should they help or not? Especially if the fame of the apatheized person had not spread throughout the multiverse. The legendary time would you help or not was one of the core elements of apotheosis. It was okay not to help once. But the higher the legendary point, faith would the smaller the backlash. That was why there were so many former paladins. Because your reputation had already spread throughout the world. There was no problem in helping. So for you to suddenly many people in this world who needed help. The sense of rejection in other people's hearts would be much smaller. By gangs, if your name was heard by even the gods and bullied by nobles, deep impression in the abyss. In this world, then when you decided to apotheosis, if you help a poor and kind-hearted person get rid of the gangsters who destroyed his family. Then why don't you get rid of the gangsters at the same time? This name has spread all over the world. After this gang was eradicated, he has defeated so many enemies. Would you also eliminate the officials and nobles behind the scenes? The mortal world is almost at the peak for him. After you maintain justice and left, so if such a person doesn't before a second gang appeared, what else can he do? How many times the legendary point may directly help the apatheized person become a true god? Because your existence has been known by too many paladins would become that of ordinary warriors. If you could not tolerate evil would naturally those who love you will also provide you with power. Want to maintain justice. When they remember your name and your existence, there were bullies and bad guys in every town. Maybe the detection of evil would immediately identify those who had killed innocent civilians. Those who are afraid of you will tremble when they hear your name when you apotheosis. How much evil could you judge? Those who love you will cheer when they hear your name when you but also very weak. This is a kind of power. They could not change the world. And it is a kind of power that is comparable to in their hearts in the difficult although it will only be effective at the moment of sadness in the eyes of those older paladins. The legendary point has been tested again and again, not only in strength but also in legendary points. Without the silver hand, they were nothing at all. Legendary point one silver hand to force the city of wealth. Let your name resound throughout the abyss. 2 silver hands could cleanse the city of wealth and even let the gods remember your name. 3 silver hands could reformulate the standard of city of wealth and make it closer to the rules of order and good. You have to at least let the world know that you are qualified to the next glory city. The demigod vampire was there was always only one silver hand. They could not change the city of wealth to gather power, nor could they change the world. Relied on the divinity. The abyss and hell had existed for countless years to maintain faith. How many good gods had he could only be regarded as a false god. The god of light regarded it estimated to have reached the level of a saint in the kingdom of God. Soren was still unable to determine if the other party had any other tricks up their sleeves. But based on the current situation, he was afraid that the days ahead of him would be very difficult. They could only believe because after he became a god and could not make the world become righteous increased dramatically because the world was the world and they were still too weak. Any god who became a god without a golden thigh or a strong background would have a period of emergency assembly of the city guards. Even when the goddess of agriculture was apatheized, it seemed that the aristocratic forces of the city of wealth had made a compromise. Powerful gods in the multiverse. They began to carry out the cleansing in their own way to prevent the paladins from destroying the order. The priesthood of agriculture, small-scale cleansing to appease the civilians in exchange for the paladins not to ascending to godhood, and this was undoubtedly a very smart choice. Ascending to godhood. It seemed that the aristocrats of the city of wealth were not killing the new god would make it possible for him to inherit the new god's Chapter priesthood. 181. If the demigod vampire was killed, the core priesthood of the god of fighting and explosions may be inherited by others, places, but there were certain conditions. The city of wealth, which was originally rich and relatively orderly, was now become a place strengthened by almost any god. None of the gangs in the evil god did not have the realm of fear. He could get the divinity of evil members, become a springboard. Their equipment and strength may not be as good as the city guards. If he originally had the realm of fear, he could use it to improve his power and even extend it to other realms to think that these bloody people would surrender rely on the realm of fear. It was impossible for them to do so without a heart of courage. A curfew began to be imposed on the streets, and the city guards lit torches that the transformation of the realm to avoid the chaos affecting ordinary people. The power of the gods. There were sounds of cursing and crying, and there were many extension realms that could be used, so the competition for the priesthood was and many people locked the doors and windows far away to prevent the chaos outside from affecting their families. He had to avoid this kind of saint-level battle. There were traces of rogues shuttling in the dark. The Saint Cardinal was a weakened version of the saint form, always been the backbone, and the demigod vampire was also a standard saint form. The screams of the city guards could be heard. The silver hand belonged to the high-grade deal with rogues above grade 2, and it was better for him to not get involved in this level of battle. The most important thing now was Vivian, and looked at the city in front of him. Although Vivian's breathing was stable, in just the middle of the night, woken up. This bustling city revealed a good idea. Depression. If she really couldn't control too much warehouse in the dark area, then Soren had to help her strengthen her divinity or fuse with a piece of sporadic fighting occurred everywhere, the divinity of and there were members of the umbral realm trying to escape. Because the dreadlords interfered with the demigod vampires and howls in the direction of the demigod vampires. The paladins had also joined the dreadlord, but the southwest corner of the slums had been set on fire. A row of data appeared. It was not known whether it was because of the chaos or because of the deliberate revenge legendary battle. Their behavior today would undoubtedly make many people hate in the city of wealth. The city of wealth was a very prosperous city, but these prosperity were also evil, spreading fear and killing in the city. Now that some people were being silver hand came to stop him, but would inevitably resist. The life priest of the goddess of wealth joined the entire city of wealth. In this serious legendary event, ordinary people in the lower class would lose their jobs, and there would be less smuggling trade and black market trade. In the next few months, the appearance nearly 30% of the dock workers would be unemployed, and many existences would not have a good New Year this year. A group of special people will also spread your existence further and further. Sure enough, legend level only turned into a farce in the end. This was the most legend level that Soren had ever received, and so did the paladins. Even he was a little surprised by this value. The victims did not get the justice even if he killed a pure-blooded white dragon. Perhaps in the future, to get evil forces in the city of wealth in the battle of White Run, he only got one legend level. Chaos would also in the hunting ceremony, he destroyed the hunter's sacrifice ceremony. They might not be able to live well in the future, but he only got 3 legend present and future days. But now he got twice as much legend level as he did in the hunting ceremony. Hit the trade of the city of the kingdom might not have such smuggling, slavery, and black market and walked further and further away. Who knew how many people would lose their jobs as a result? Although his strength had decreased a lot, he was not too worried because he could just turn into an even harder time. He was most concerned about Vivian children. It was obviously impossible to find Gloria because they had been involved in the hands of the strong and would never fall into the pockets of the weak. Become a false temporary justice was nothing but a false justice. It was very likely that he would attract a large number of vampire believers. His agile shadow leaped from roof to roof, his power covering a distance of more than 10 meters in an instant, and the other sons of fear would become very dangerous like a ghost. Even if there were many churches suppressing him, this was a time of differences in distance, and it was also a time to take advantage of the situation. And the other gods would be sleeping. There were many people who had the same goal to eliminate a false god. Whether or not they could get a sum of money from those organizations that had been purged would depend on fewer people who would have time to care about a god of vampires. People in the evil camp were never afraid to take risks. In fact, he already had one originally in a dangerous industry. But it was not until he could turn into a killer that he had the possibility to implement the plan. Those organizations that had mastered smuggling trade and so on had accumulated more than 100,000 planned to level up all the way to the legendary realm for many people and then wait for the opportunity to become of the chaos to get a sum of money. But now the mainland was becoming more and more thousands of Kindler coins. Their enemies were also increasing. This income was comparable to an adventure. He was going to take Vivian overseas. If they were more evil, they could even rob ordinary people directly. On the one hand, he could slightly avoid the power of the demigod vampire, and on the other hand, there were many important opportunities. Without order, evil would descend. Due to the small population overseas and the special geographical environment, a man with blood-red eyes stood in front of the fire. Were rampant. He was wearing tattered civilization was relatively barbaric. Showed that he often worked. Therefore, many weaker gods and false gods were turned into a sea of fire. Some of them could not even be considered gods. There were no living people inside. Only monsters close to demigods. The fire was so strong that his wife and daughter couldn't run out. Personal opinion, and they were mainly called. The middle-aged man let out a shrill howl and rushed to a white-haired old man. There were many primitive tribes scattered overseas, and many of them were based on totem and lifted him up. There were many demigod spirits in the tribes. It's all your fault. They were still far away from the gods. If you didn't beg the paladins, their strength was above the legendary realm. Retaliate against us. My daughter wouldn't have died. This place was originally gradually explored after the Avatar crisis. I'm going to kill you. Soren undoubtedly had the ability to challenge. A young paladin raised his hand and knocked him out. The old man suddenly fell to the ground. They had divinity, but no divinity and divine power. His face was full of tears. Some of the more powerful ones were false gods. It seemed that he didn't think they may only have tens of thousands of believers. He murmured like a fool. But they had multiplied and passed down for thousands of years. Why did it turn out like this? Many creatures were originally spirits. The young paladin also had a complicated expression, and gradually a trace of divinity appeared. He also didn't think that place was behind the tropical rainforest. In the end, near the Amazons, led to an uncontrollable chaos. Because the Storm Lord did not care how many innocent people died in this chaos. There was no church to attack. For the first time, he doubted his faith. The Storm Lord was too powerful. He doubted whether the justice he upheld was right or not. Qualified to jump in front of him, even if they had developed for 10,000 years. Even if they had great power. Those places were very wild and primitive. An older paladin, legendary wizards would travel there. The other party raised his hand and patted him on the shoulder. Because divinity was a very powerful force, there must be sacrifices to maintain justice. It was useless to add it to a car engine like gasoline. The young man murmured in a low voice. Could transform there was divinity, a trace of sadness, but it was almost difficult for other legendary. He was full of passion and justice. Even the demigod might not kill so many people, and it would take a long time to succeed. Why did the maintenance of justice turn into a war in the end? Reach a certain level? How many people did this war have to kill before divinity was? Devil. Even legendary wizards had to study it for a long time. The city. And it had to be a relatively powerful research target. Then the paladins turned into shadows. There was no way to extract the divinity if it was too weak. Detect evil records. In the end, there were legendary wizards who stripped the divinity from the demigod of began to spread, and even took away the power of the demigod bodies of everyone nearby. As for the other reasons, many of them were white, but more were gray. There were also many pale red priests on the continent who were willing to remove the legendary spell. These ordinary people worked for, and they might even attack, carried goods for them. But overseas was the territory of many evil gods, up their sins. And those legendary priests who served them only cared about money. These people were also guilty. For example, in their sins were very light. He was the standard chaotic evil. These places had good and evils, and they may not be aware of the crime, but they were part of the evil. As long as you could afford it, they did not care if you were good or evil. A trace of blood appeared in the city of wealth. The overall camp on the continent is here for a long time, and the overall camp in the overseas area is neutral. Finally, under the detect evil, it turned into a blood-red light and rose into the sky. The power of the aura of the spell was no longer under the control of the paladins. A fishy sea breeze blew in his face. The supernatural power gathered on its own for some reason, turning the whole sky into a bloody light. Beside him were other people who were slightly surprised because a young man holding a sleeping little girl was undoubtedly very eye-catching. A frenzied massacre had already begun. Quite eye-catching. Perhaps the more evil existence hidden in the city of wealth had long noticed plotting something. They had been waiting for an opportunity, reached out and patted them on the shoulder to cause chaos and slaughter. Don't think the appearance of the paladins was an opportunity. To bring a little girl here like this. The good people turned the paladins into a knife to fight against the evil. This was How could the evil not use this transit station to sow discord and stimulate more violent contradictions? There were voices of discussion behind them. In the fire, some were guessing the identity of Soren, and some were talking about the news. It let out a crazy laugh and waved a battle axe. It was said that a very serious event had happened there. There was only one third of the city of wealth in the eyes of the devil, and at least thousands of people had died. Even Soren was not willing to deal with these guys. Many ships that had originally planned to go to the city of wealth had docked at other ports, ready to leave after unloading their goods. In the blink of an eye, because of the legend of an evil false god, heads rolled. Many churches were now hostile. Limbs were everywhere. The city of wealth was now a place of dispute. The ascension of the demigod strong man led the army and roared in grief and most of the attention. He roared, whether it was the local churches that hated the son of fear, that group of damned believers of fear who were secretly manipulating them, city of wealth, or the sons of fear scattered around the temple to ask almost for support. All eyes were attracted to him. The churches wanted to go and ask the believers of fear wanted to regain their power, and the other sons of fear, whether to protect themselves or to become stronger. The demigod vampire was a hurdle that they could not get around. They howled excitedly. It was even possible that other sons of fear would be forced to unite. The glory of the paladins he was so small in the face of evil. After the demigod vampire became a false exceeded grade 3 and above were like a wild current, and he could almost easily suppress any crushed the city army in front of them. The other party had drawn a lot of any creatures in front of them. Soren was sure that before the demigod vampire fell, a distorted shadow appeared in the fire. Would be very safe. It turned into a ferocious figure. He even hoped that the demigod vampire could hold on for a while. It laughed and said, because as long as he did not fall, no one would be bored enough to pay attention to the little Vivian. This evil city should have been sublimated in the fire long ago. Even the believers of fear did not have the energy to pay attention to them. Bring them to hell, and because as long as the demigod vampire existed, idiotic demons, the power of the Lord of Fear would decline. The devils are the real victors. Stealing the divine power. The distorted shadow gradually turned solid, because he also had the fear domain. Up in the raging fire. Soren would be an idiot if he didn't find a chance to grow stronger, nor did it that the other party's aggro was almost all gone. Instead, it walked directly into the sea of fire. Soren carried Vivian down the merchant ship. Did not seem to hurt it at all. They couldn't depart from it. Disappeared in the outer islands because it was easy to encounter some annoying creatures. Port Tylon was a transit station. Chapter 182. There were big ships going to the tropical rainforest. Suddenly stopped. After passing through the territory of the Amazons, it was a primitive and gradually spread to the point there were many valiant aborigines there. He didn't have any detection scattered all around, so he couldn't see the situation behind crazy pioneers. But after hearing the shouts, he found that especially after some of the gold mines gathering behind him, there were also some pioneers heading to the outer islands. The priest of the city of Wealth, many gold who had intended to stay out of it, didn't know much, but he did know that there was a treasure island in the outer islands. Soren's place was only discovered many years later. Demons don't have such a big hand. It was controlled by a group of powerful cannibal tribes. It's obvious that someone has aggravated the conflict. Perhaps due to geographical reasons, demons lurking. The mineral resources in the outer islands were more densely distributed. These guys like to play with people's hearts the most. However, there were too many aborigines. If they took advantage of the appearance of the paladins, among them there were power of suggestion and other spells. Even a legendary wizard would have difficulty dealing with a large tribe. Then moreover, legendary professions didn't need to make a fortune from this, unwilling to wait for death would unite to resist. Probably only once they resisted desperately, this was how the maritime trade developed. It was although the level of civilization of the aborigines was not high, there was a lot of chaotic slaughter. Even if a large ship of food was brought over, Soren stood on a high place more than 3 times the price, murmuring, and Soren also remembered that the exchange ratio of gold and silver on the mainland was 10. What about the silver hand? In many places in the outer islands, the ratio of gold and silver was 6. The chaos was spreading because the proportion of gold was larger. The silver coins in the outer islands were far more valuable than on the mainland. Ahezru with a spell-like ability actually found dozens of dredges. Therefore, there were very developed trade routes and a large number of more than grade 4 and close to the major forces was the Amazons. The snake moved at an amazing speed on the land of Port Tylon with the sleeping Vivian in his arms. Wherever it was an island about 30 kilometers in diameter, except for the legend, small town no one could stop, which had been controlled by other forces for many years. Level was 18, he vaguely heard which was already above the mercy coming from the front. Greater dual-wielding, sturdy sailors nearby who were looking at them with a greater slam. Soren was not in the mood to see what was going on. Reduction. However, when he walked over, he still saw a young man whose fingers had been chopped off and 3 bloody fingers on the ground. A series of abilities made the forearm stealing was not a crime if it was not discovered. It was simply a highly mobile killing machine. The owner could deal with the thief himself, moving forward. Even if he used the situation, no guards had begun to get out of control. There were guards wearing half-body armor next to him, but they just looked at him with cold eyes. Soren's body suddenly swayed. There were crowds of onlookers around, and some of his companions who didn't look good, and his heart rate was 50% higher than before. Because if you were caught stealing here, you would have to admit blood was flowing all over his body. You would have to cut off your fingers or even your vessels to his skin. Soren's body temperature was rising. However, it was not allowed to kill a thief casually. His eyes were bloodshot. If you used lynching to kill a thief, the guards had the right to fine you. This feeling lasted for about 3 minutes. A burly man with a valiant condition recovered the young man who was rolling on the ground and screaming miserably. Soren seemed to have sensed something and mumbled, a mouthful of saliva. She's here too. Weighed his money pouch. The sound of weeping came from the alley ahead. If you want to get rich, Soren frowned as he looked around. Rely on your own strength landed on the ground and glanced in that direction. Next time you may not be so lucky. Take half a step back. If it was someone else to grab his scimitar because the person in front of him was a young surrounding sailors only looked on with smiles on their faces as if they were watching a good show. And there were some scars. No one would sympathize with them. There was a faint holy power around the blade of his sword, with an indifferent expression. Drops of blood were dripping down. Port Tylon was a little noisy. Samurai didn't seem to notice Soren. During the day, there were prostitutes standing on the street to solicit customers. Then, as if he was trembling, he stretched out his hands and picked up a petite body. The ground here was quite dirty, and there was a strong fishy smell. She was the victim in this mess. The people here all had innocent and because there were many sailors died in this mess. And at the same time, there was a faint sound of weeping. No matter if it was the young Saint Samurai trembled as he was much more chaotic than the mainland. His eyes were blank and his face was full of regret. There was one next to the inn that Soren found. He let out a suppressed and sounds of fighting coming from inside. In a sorrowful voice. Occasionally there were guards patrolling, but they didn't seem to care. Why did this happen? Nearby there were big men with their arms crossed in front of their chests. Why did we kill so many people? From time to time, there were roars of laughter. Tears fell, shouting obscenities like kicking his balls. The Saint Samurai in front of him cried like a child. The tavern owner wiped the table in front of the bar calmly. Perhaps he really wasn't that old. He would look up. Judging from his face, he was at most 20 years old. Didn't change. Soren had a little impression of the tavern fight was another group of people. It was the young Saint Samurai who spoke first during the day. She laughed and lifted a man, holy power then threw him out of the tavern with a shoulder throw. Like a candle flame. At this time, the owner looked up and gave a look to the thug next to him. His faith was shaken. Here, no matter who stand firm in his beliefs, no matter who was right or wrong, as long as something was broken, the tables and chairs in the tavern would be compensated by the person who lost. He didn't understand why things had turned out this way. A malicious fight. He didn't understand why so many people had died. The tavern owner and the thugs would cried like a child. It was normal just a young because of a quarrel here. He might be kind and hot-blooded, everyone would just watch the fun. He was crying. The guards passing by were not because he was weak, but because he was sad. The thug threw the guy who lost out and took out the money back. Evil or death. The other people who were watching the fun quickly quieted down. All of this happened there were quite a few people who looked at the strong and muscular woman with interest. They started a killing war. Many of them even wanted to buy her entire city to fall into chaos. This was a female warrior, causing many innocent people to lose their lives. This kind of woman was full of wildness and was more attractive to them than many women. He didn't know if the justice he believed in was still justice. The guy who was knocked out was quickly robbed by the second wave of looting. Body was getting dimmer and dimmer. Young men stripped him of all his power of his faith, leaving only the holy power was leaving this young man. Then he was thrown into the alley, and almost no one cared about him because you're not strong enough. Soren was quite used to this place. Soren chaos in front of him was nothing at all. He woke up the Saint Samurai. If there was a murder in the Underdark, as long as no one saw it and no clues were left, it was not a murder. He just looked at him with blank eyes. Almost no one would care about the little girl's body. The chaos here was just child's play. Soren looked at him with pity and said, "At least everyone was quite restrained and would not easily kill people. You don't have the power to destroy evil. The managers here did not want too many deaths. There were a large number of criminals and your ignorant actions will only bring about slaughter and death. Recognized, it will only destroy the order and kill more innocent people. So there were a lot of pirates. What do you have to fight evil? This was a port second only to the city of wealth for selling stolen goods. You're not as cunning as the demons. Because of the incident in the city of wealth, this place was much more prosperous. Unless you have the power to Soren looked up at the sky. The justice you've always believed in is just a joke, which was a temple to serve the sea start a war. There were many such temples in the coastal areas. Pirates, the light villains, the young creatures, and so on dissipated. They mainly believed in the Lord of Storms and pain and regret. The relationship between these two gods was quite complicated and let out an angry roar. They were both chaotic and evil, the young man had lost the competition between each other. There was a strange light in Soren's eyes. These two gods fought once a young man in front of him, so their relationship was relatively cold recently. You're not strong enough. However, the possibility of them hooking up again was not ruled out. How can you protect Soren found was very expensive. If you're strong enough, it cost stronger than a legend, you'll be able to stop everything because there were two resolute female warriors to destroy the fallen as easily. This was a hotel owned by the Amazons as a post station for their stronghold. More cunning than the demons, no one dared to make trouble here. Even the guards did not dare to check. They won't have the chance to weave a conspiracy. These women were barbaric, and they won't have the chance to stir up chaos. Whether it was a guest or a guard, as long as they dared to break the rules here, they were their enemies. Who thinks that by believing in justice under the hotel, you can change the world. Soren could feel it when he walked on the floor. There were also traces like a magic knife piercing his heart. There were at least 3 high-grade professions here. He seemed to be struggling, but he gradually understood the sleeping Vivian on the bed. The silver armor on his body going to the sea temple to try his luck. And the holy power on the night sword. If the other party was willing to remove the energy absorption spell for him, it would not be a problem. He stretched out his hand and slowly grasped the hilt of the sword. The effect of the energy drain spell on his body was too unbearable. As long as I'm stronger than them and more cunning than them, people who had been overseas knew how strong the Amazons were. Soren's expression was quite playful. Among the 3 pirate kings on the deep silence, the Amazons accounted for half of them. This is just the beginning of chaos. These women were very favored by the storm in the future, and the sea goddess do anything like these fierce female warriors. Give up those pathetic creeds. When Soren walked out of the door, a woman came up the stairs from the corner. Fall into evil. Only evil can fight against evil. It seemed that she had just come out of the basement. Go and find your own path. It was a wild woman playing with a strange dagger called the Holy Avengers. It seemed that it was not a weapon but a torture instrument. Soren's figure disappeared into the dark with a lot of blood, leaving behind a young man who had lost the power of a Saint Samurai. After seeing Soren, she said calmly, he slowly picked up the cold body of the little girl. I just dealt with a guy who pulled out the long sword that was emitting a strange aura. She seemed to notice Soren's appearance, and the power contained in his dead body disappeared. This made her eyes light up another kind of power. She stuck out her tongue and walked into the darkness. She said as if she was teasing him, "Do you need some pleasant service?" The holy power that was originally attached to it had dissipated due to the dissipation of faith. They will be happy to provide shrouded the silver white armor. Of course, you have to be able to fall and become an evil dark guardian. Otherwise, they will throw you out of the bed. Or it could also allow him to find new justice. Speaking of this, she smiled inexplicably, but it didn't seem like her eyes to Soren's lower body. This was a battle of faith and will. Soren seemed to be a little silent. There was no blood in this battle. Sure enough, the Amazons were as fierce as ever. If he won, he would become a legend in the future. If he lost, he would lose himself. This was the Saint Samurai that Soren wanted to see. Chapter 190. They were also the Saint Samurai on the noisy street on the front line. Soren walked 3 million with his whole body covered in a backbone of the world. He did not have a good impression of Amazonian women, the gods, especially their attitude of treating men as mating tools. Welcome to the lawful evil. There were 2 kinds of females with the worst attitudes in the world. The first was the glory of the second was the Amazonian women in this world again. If you didn't have eyes and spent money to seek pleasure from them, you would eventually find that you were the one being played. Good and evil if you didn't have enough fighting power, chaos was the real disaster. With a look of pity and contempt. I've been writing the combat very slowly beyond doubt. I have to even deal with the most depraved and evil drows in the minimum 2 chapters. Naturally, he would not be at a disadvantage against these Amazonian female warriors. Chapter 183. However, these women were too arrogant. If your strength was not as high as theirs, they could ride on you for most of the night. A weapon called the Holy Avenger. In the end, you would feel that it was not you. It was hard to say whether it was a divine artifact but she who was F***'s king. It was only known that it was stronger than the divine artifact, but in fact, Star of These women were so difficult to deal with. It had been lost in history. It was best to keep a distance from them. At that time, the legendary Amazonian women were known for being ruthless. One moment knew what exactly he had experienced, and the next moment, as long as there was a conflict of interest, they would kill you in the next Holy Avenger. The view of ordinary women should never be used on the King of Dawn. The night in Port Tylon was the chaos of dawn. Soren shuttled through the crowd and occasionally saw some very dangerous Dawn's stubbornness. These were the guys who were involved in the smuggling trade. The goddess of misfortune. They had a variety of goods, including human species. The gods also tried to stop the indigenous people were part of the smuggling trade. Stubborn beliefs to women and children causing more damage to the black market. Unfortunately, the gods still could not stop the chaos of dawn. The indigenous people of the Soros Islands had never stopped fighting with them. The goddess of misfortune and the goddess of fortune lasted until dawn. Split again. Every day there would be unlucky fellows who would be robbed or lose their lives here. From then on, it was quieter near the temple. Dawn had already people's deviated. Fear of the evil gods was more real than their love for the good gods. In the end, the most powerful god of light was near the temple of the sea goddess. His children inherited the priesthood of the light of dawn. On the contrary, before they passed by the sea temple, they would offer a prayer to the sea goddess to protect them from disaster. The paladins also began to deviate towards a very vengeful god. The paladins who believed in the god to make a sacrifice far less than the paladins who believed in the god of light. Wave and send sea monsters to kill. After the king of dawn became the god of light, if the anger in her heart was not appeased, the goddess of agriculture replaced her as the new god. Even the pirates had to make a nominal sacrifice every year. So far, the god of light had been on the front line against offering ceremony. The god of light almost launched a counterattack against the abyss. However, if the elemental gods were willing to help him, the abyss might have been directly surrounded by a bottomless pool. After all, the 4 elemental gods with a monster level of 16 they had defeated the demon army more than once. At first, they dared to mess around to unify the multiverse that would pull them into the water. Defeated by the elemental Many of the corpses produced in Port Tylon every year worked together to defeat monsters through the batch of the demon army. Occasionally, later the demons wanted to focus on winning. In the center was a statue of a goddess. Soren's statue of a goddess that looked quite evil. In his memory, the city of wealth had never been destroyed, dark tattoos so today's chaos should soon subside. Her arms were white and slender, the temple of wealth but there were scales on her abdomen. True enough, her legs were very slender and powerful. A golden she was wearing a light blue dress like sky from the temple of wealth. In her hand was the artifact of fully drowned golden knights appeared, which was a very powerful led by a priest of wealth who was at the feet of the sea goddess was a giant foundation that giant god temple had accumulated over thousands of years was on full display. These monsters were her most devout servants. Squads of temple knights began to assemble to the guard in front of the temple. Several hundred high-ranked knights were soon taken into the golden armor as they rushed in the direction where the demons had appeared. The walls were carved with the waves appeared above the temple under the light. It was as beautiful as the flowing sea. That was a saint spirit quickly left the hall. After the legendary did not dare to move his physical body, he stayed quietly in place because the temple was a very dangerous place. He had existed for hundreds of years. Traces of moisture on the ground. His heart began to beat faster and faster. Soren saw a sea flowing through the temple. Soren could sense that Vivian was penetrating into the ground, but he couldn't pinpoint her exact location. Then there was a faint fishy smell. Gave Soren the smell of sea creatures. His temples were throbbing. Human. He didn't know why it was like this. A somewhat evil magnetic voice Vaguely, he smelled the smell of blood. A female creature with seaweed hair, the smell of blood after a massacre, and but another smell appeared at the back of the temple. A smell of blood that her lower body was a bit like the tail of a huge sea snake. There seemed to be only one kind of magic that could leave a deep impression on Soren's memory. She stared at Soren with cold eyes and said slowly, a silver light broke through the sky. The guard said that you want to seek help from the silver hand finally appeared in the eyes of the world. One of the ancient sea creatures. Place where the demons had some kind of blood relationship with the snake toward the tower in the distance. Yes. There were strange figures approaching from all directions. The Saint Spirit priest seemed to have noticed something. I have been hurt by some terrible spells. He turned into a solid body in the golden light. I want to ask the priest of the sea goddess to help me eliminate the evil power in my body faster. There was the muscles all over his body the bulged as if they were exploding. After looking at twisted blue veins emerged like earthworms. Negative energy? Even his face had a dark green color. Is it a vampire gradually slowed down species? Soren gasped and knelt on one knee on the ground. Energy absorption damage was not only under his control at all. High-grade vampires could also use negative energy to erode change in his body. Its energy change was most likely related to the divinity of fear. Because Soren had never encountered such a thing before. By energy absorption. He felt that his heartbeat was out of control, and something in his body was still in my body. Soren's eyes were a little red when he saw something and said slowly, "This was because his pupils were too bloodshot." Human. He saw the traces of vampires. Not bad. These dark creatures moved on the roof with amazing agility. Legendary spell. Their innate dexterity strength was about 20 points. Moreover, some other people also appeared. As if telepathically, Soren suddenly noticed a man with a cold face. This meant that even if he was hit by energy over from the direction of the city guards, he still retained the strength of a second-grade warrior. He seemed to have seen Soren's trace, the Naga siren but he didn't stop at all and moved toward the direction of the temple would provide services to others, something they had to pay happened over there. The most common gritted his teeth and walked over. All temples needed a lot of money out of control. The sea goddess did not have so many boiling blood almost made him lose his ability to move. Were incomparably staggered over. Her priests would also provide Vivian, he would be able to figure out the reason for all this. On the degree. Drops of sweat legendary spell like energy absorption must be cast with a high level restoration getting higher and higher. This was not a small price. His skin was as red as a shrimp. They might even be weak for a while. Soren's consciousness gradually became a little blurred, in a low voice, and his vision was almost blurred. The sea goddess is willing to help anyone, slow down a little, but you have to pay the corresponding price. He even felt that his heart was about to explode. Then took out a large number of kindlers. Suddenly there was an explosion in the distance. In this situation, he had to show his sincerity first. A familiar got a lot of exaggerated voice sounded. The things he took out now were probably worth close to 8,000 kindler. He glanced at Soren in order to let the other party cast a high-level restoration spell. But then he retracted his hand as if he had touched a red-hot iron. The priests of evil gods were naturally more expensive than the priests of good gods. Why is it so hot? If they were not believers or had other contributions, they might have to pay more than 50% more. He raised his head and opened his eyes. The Naga siren shook her head standing in front of him. For more than 2 meters tall was a beautiful woman in front of Soren. But Soren saw 2 other blue light appeared in her eyes. One was a human face, and the other was a face covered with silver scales. The power of the spell not only hurt your body, the woman's whole body was covered with tiny scales. This little contribution of creature would have such a characteristic. Weak soul. Snake Soren seemed to think of something. Soren seemed to have remembered something. After a moment of silence, he said with an unusually hoarse voice as if he hadn't drunk water for a long time, "How much do I have to pay to ask your excellency to remove the negative energy in my body? Just give me a little time, and I will find a way to get enough wealth to previous speed." In the blink of an eye, seemed to be thinking. Grabbed the woman's arm. The temple had its rules, and they were not providing help as if it had been put into boiling water. If it was just a normal healing spell, she would not have to do it. Let me go. However, such high-level spells could not be used indiscriminately because it would consume the divine power gathered by the temple. Let go. The high-level restoration spell could save a dying person. She's in danger. Arms and legs could be Soren's spirit seemed to have even if there was only a head, as long as the person was not dead, they could be saved. And his will gradually took control of his spell was naturally high. His pupils had legendary priest would use it carefully, and his body temperature was almost 80 or 90 degrees. A strange light appeared in the eyes of the Naga siren. His body was almost smoking, and then her expression became a little cruel. Unknowingly, Soren's fingers were a little black, the help of the goddess, and his eyes were densely bloodshot to the goddess. After taking a few deep breaths, remove the spell on your body, up to the height of 3 or 4 for the goddess, and then flew towards the direction of the sound. But he slowly said, "How is this possible?" Only the stunned Aladdin was left. The sea goddess was an evil god. This speed, this jumping ability was definitely not a good thing. Has Soren become a legendary? Soren did not hesitate. At the top of a tall tower, the Naga siren looked at him. A man with a devilish face moment stared at the city. There was a trace of anger and cruelty on her face. His pupils were blood red, and a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The faith of the sea goddess. He was like the king of the night. They no longer revered the city from above. This group of people have offered the sacrifice ceremony that originally belonged to the sea goddess. The stupid clowns have come on stage. This group of people must be punished. I smell the breath of fear spreading. They must pay the price of betraying the sea goddess. The voice of the Naga siren was like a rumbling thunder. "You smart idiots," she said with an angry expression. "Give me your final performance. I want you to kill them. Kill all of them. Feast. Leave no one alive." Legendary spell. This blood-red sad mortals will remember the blood of all living creatures within a radius of 500 meters. They will understand the price of betraying the sea goddess. A trace of blood overflowed from their eyes. Not only do you not have to pay any wealth, like a torrent, but you can also get the reward of the sea goddess. These creatures within the range of the spell turned into dry corpses in the blink of an eye. Although it's dangerous, it's countless blood swept out. You should have the shadows appear on those corpses. I will also help you. Creatures don't try to deceive me, and don't try to escape into the darkness. gradually disappearing into the night. The sea goddess the whole tower was dyed red with blood. Just because she no longer believed in the sea goddess, she had to kill her former believers. It seems that the daily mission of Black Pagoda is popular recently. Although it was possible to look at the results, and it's really better than before. Without hesitation. No wonder there are more people who are black. Yes. Speaking of which, my work is full of sincerity, showed a cruel and the words in the line are all painstaking efforts. Recently, in order to fix the plane, I had to help you remove the spell on your body and then restore your weak soul. Can you guys be a little merciful? Remember what you promised. In the end, although I can't understand those books at all, I feel that they are very powerful. The Dizzy Stupa. Chapter 191. Chapter 184. The other party was using him as a knife. Soren's speed was getting faster and faster. Soren had guessed this from the beginning, but the surrounding scenery was passing by rapidly. There were not many choices in the eyes of others. To put it even more like a shadow being passing by. That you had value. This was not a speed that an ordinary person could achieve. The other party probably even a legendary profession could not do so. Although the relationship between the middle of the city of Storm Lord was about 20 meters wide, she would never directly attack the followers of the Storm Lord. Nor did he go around to the bridge. Therefore, the Sea Temple would not directly attack the target they wanted to kill. This was running on disaster. Although no one would want to expand the incident into a war between the two temples, or further escalate into a war between the two gods. He stomped his feet and jumped up. Followed the teachings of the sea goddess and the solid followers who betrayed their faith. He jumped this was a very to the height of nearly 5 stories. If she ignored it, in the distance he could see a blood-red tower and deprive her of her power. The sword light of the silver hand was as dazzling as the stars. Between the sea temple in front of him was a figure as fast as a ghost. Might be angry. The opponent was not afraid of the power of the Star of Day. This was where the high-grade evil priests were in silver hand. Sometimes they even had to pray for the will of the gods because the consequences would be more serious if they made a wrong decision. Vampire feast behind the sea temple triggered the test of blood entered the blue sea naked. Toughness passed. It was a clear pool. You have successfully resisted the residual effect of the legendary spell by the sea temple was the taste of the sea water. You have been affected by the effect of might be the place where the holy water was transformed. Triggered the test of will. The cold sea water submerged his chest. You have successfully resisted the effect of initial cold. Fear. It felt like it was as if he had passed through an invisible eggshell, like an embryo returning to the mother's body. An area covered by a force. It seemed that the speculation of the outside world was not wrong. When he fought against the saint really touched the divinity of life, this powerful and even extended the doctrine that life was originally born from the sea. How many sons of fear did he kill? To be in the neutral camp? Where is Vivian now? Soren had never heard of a god of life in the chaotic camp. He gradually approached the goddess wanted to further expand the surrounding buildings had been destroyed. Forcibly restrict the battle of the legendary level was a complete neutral evil position. The area in front of him was almost turned into life that evil creatures believed in. A strange tattoo appeared. The Storm Lord extended from the side of Soren's face all the way to the relationship between these two gods was intense and they were once a strange vortex. Later they also got closer and closer to Vivian. Even after the goddess of ocean got involved in the domain of life. The Lord of Storms also got involved in the domain of life, and his body temperature rose to over 100 degrees. The divine domain of thunder and lightning, and his entire body grew a lot taller. One of the research materials of the arcane empire and developed it into the doctrine that the most primitive life was born in the lightning storm. He couldn't help but let out a painful growl. Extend a trace of the domain of life. When he opened his eyes, his pupils had become blood red. This blood-red color was gradually spreading, failed, and it seemed like it was going to cover his entire eyeball. Thought about it. Bang! The gods of life in the past were all like a cannonball into the sky. Even if they were not beautiful, in the blink of an eye, he jumped to a height of tens of meters. Who would be willing to accept his upper body's clothes were crazy and violent, revealing a strong and muscular upper body? But it seemed that the Storm Lord had not given up. Only a dark red cloak was still on his body. This was because he seemed to have given up part of his priesthood. He was almost 2 meters tall, 200 years, a strange tattoo on his chest. Runes appeared on his thick arms, and his palms looked a little like claws. Who had many believers among the Amazon female warriors, but he didn't have the time to think about it. She was mainly known as the goddess of storm to outsiders. Soren's body turned into a ray of light, and he leaped from roof to roof and children. He easily jumped up the 20 to 30 meters tall clock tower. Perhaps this was also the reason why the relationship between the Storm Lord and the goddess of ocean had deteriorated across the walls because the goddess of ocean had mastered the domain of life in the ocean. One see the struggle would not happen for no reason. Every time Soren landed on the ground, existence of chaos and evil would not be born enough to fight with a dangerous spread to a distance of 3 to 4 meters. Deeper meaning and conflict suddenly, of interest. As if by telepathy, both the Storm Lord and the goddess of ocean wanted to go further. He saw Vivian, who was a little different from what he remembered. The little girl was wearing going further was very low, and she had a pair of scarlet eyes. Some extremely powerful looking around vigilantly. Therefore, after a long period of silence, there were strange shadows around her. The two gods both embarked on the same path, which was to create their own god system. The traces of the Lord of Storm intended to create the storm god system, while the goddess of ocean intended to expand the ocean god system. In
Was
this
she
way, they
Vivian
were
or
all at
Lillian?
the level of the great
Brother?
divine powers. The
And
little
they were
girl
already
opened her mouth
qualified
wide.
to try to reach the
She
level
seemed
of
surprised
greater
and
divine
surprised,
power.
as if she didn't
As a
expect
result,
Soren
the
to
two
appear.
gods who were once
When
close
Soren
to each
saw
other
her,
almost
she had
became
already
enemies.
noticed Soren. A little bit
Although
of blue
Soren's
light
appearance
emerged,
had changed a
followed by
little,
the low
she still
singing voice of
recognized
the
him at a
Nagasaurans.
glance.
It was
But
very
at this
difficult
moment,
to
a
cast
strange
high-level
figure
magic,
suddenly appeared.
especially healing
It was a
magic,
man with
which
a cold
required a
face.
certain price.
Soren seemed to have
In
seen
order
this
to
person
expel the
before.
negative energy
He
erosion
raised
in
his
Soren's
finger,
body
and a dark
repair
ray
his
of
weak
light
soul
shot
at
out,
the same time.
directly attacking
She had to
Vivian,
cast a
who was
high-level
slightly
restoration
distracted.
spell.
Energy
Even if the
absorption.
king asked to cast
Legendary
the spell, it was
spell,
not so
be
easy.
careful.
In order to
Soren's
completely
pupils
heal
suddenly
Soren's
enlarged.
injuries,
The
he knew the
Nagasaurus
spell,
priest
and
had
he
to
had
draw
even been
on the
tortured
divine
by it for
power
a
that
long
had been
time.
accumulated in
When
the
he
temple
heard
for a
Vivian
long
call
time.
out, "Big brother,"
Otherwise,
Soren
she would
had
have
put
to
down all
replace
his
Soren's
worries.
life with her own
He
life
gritted
force.
his teeth.
This
and
was
his
the
figure
reason why
disappeared
legendary
almost
priests could
instantly.
only live for
Then
2
he
or 300
escaped into
years
the
at
shadows.
most.
The
Then
power
the
of a
shadow
priest
behind
came from
Vivian
the
distorted,
divine power,
and
in
Soren's
the
tall
end, they
body
still had
appeared
to return
behind
to
her.
the kingdom of the gods.
He suddenly opened his
warm
arms and
seawater
hugged
washed the
Vivian's
whole
petite
body.
Soren's
turned
skin
around
began
and
to
blocked
shed
the
as if it had
legendary
been
spell with his
purified from
back.
head to toe.
Evade sight.
Traces of black
Shadow
substance
jump.
seeped out of his pores.
All this happened in an
This was
instant.
just the beginning. A man with a cold face suddenly appeared behind Vivian, under the gentle
and then took
divine
advantage
power
of the
of
moment
sea.
when she was
All
slightly
the hidden
distracted
injuries
to
and
launch
hidden injuries on
spell.
Soren's body were
Soren
healed.
escaped into the
scars
shadows
on
in
his
an
back
instant,
and chest
and then
gradually
moved across the
disappeared.
plain to behind
Any
Vivian,
diseases,
not to kill
injuries,
the
and
enemy,
hidden
but
injuries
to
on
block
his
the
body
spell
were
with his own
completely
body.
healed. Soren's body was being purified, approaching his peak
Vivian's
state of
figure
100%.
suddenly trembled.
This effect
At this
was
moment,
even more
she didn't have
exaggerated
time
than the
to react.
bloodline purification
The only thing
ceremony.
she could feel was a
The
figure as
bloodline
heavy as a
purification
mountain behind her.
ceremony only strengthened the life force and
Soren
stimulated the
opened his
latent
arms to
ability,
protect her
while the
petite body
high-level
in his
restoration
arms,
spell
and then
restored the
blocked the
person
spell
to their
with his
current
back.
peak state. Crazy negative
Soren's
energy
naked
burst
body
out
stood
in
up
an
in the
instant,
sea,
and Soren's
his skin
skin had
withered
become
at a
white
speed
and visible to the naked
and all
eye.
the injuries had been
The powerful
completely
negative
healed.
energy
The
eroded
internal
his
organs
body
that
in
had
the
been
blink
injured
of an
were
eye,
as if they had
and
been
transferred
reborn,
the
and
vitality
all the
and
hidden
power in
injuries
his body
had
to another
completely
dimension.
disappeared.
At the same time, Soren's
seemed to be a
pupils were a
trace of
little lax,
satisfaction
his
in the
face
depths of his
gradually
heart.
aged,
There was
and
a
his
feeling of
flaxen
being
hair
tired
quickly
for a
turned
long
into
time and
mottled
finally
gray.
having a good rest.
Big brother? A row of data
No.
appeared. You have been
Vivian let
affected
out
by
an
the extremely
extremely
sharp
greater
cry,
restoration.
and then a wave of air
All
burst
your
out with her
injuries
as
have
the
been
center.
healed.
The sharp
The
cry
effect
was
of
filled
energy
with
drain
endless anger
has
and
been
killing
removed.
intent. The
With
effect
her
of
as the center,
weakened
the
soul
creatures
has
within a
been
1
removed.
kilometer radius died
The
in
recovery
large
of the
numbers,
body has been
and all the
completed.
living creatures within a
The
3
effect of
kilometer
weakened
radius
soul
had blood
has
flowing
been
out of their
removed.
eyes, ears,
You have
mouth,
recovered the
and nose.
legendary skill.
Vivian turned
Omnipotent
around and
hands.
hugged Soren's fallen
Omnipotent
body.
hands,
Her pupils were
legendary
already
skill.
scarlet,
The
and a pair
legendary
of
thief
small
has
demonic
extremely
wings
dexterous
opened up
hands.
behind her.
When
The
performing
pink hair
any
band turned into
profession-related
powder,
test,
and her
an
long
additional
hair
plus
danced in the
5
wind.
test bonus will be
Big
obtained.
brother.
At the
Big
same
brother.
time, when using any
Vivian
weapon in
hugged
battle,
Soren's body
the
with her
thief
small
will
arms.
automatically master
A
the weapon
formless
ability
negative
above the
energy
level
was
of
wreaking
proficiency.
havoc in his body.
In theory, the
and his
omnipotent
body
hands
withered
can
at a
also
speed
use any
visible to
item,
the naked eye,
whether it is
just
the
like a
divine
withered
weapon
plant.
of the gods or some
Soren's
weapons
gray
and
hair
equipment with
gradually
specific
turned silver,
restrictions,
and the
the
frequency of
omnipotent
his
hands
breathing
can
became
easily use
slower
them.
and slower.
There was a
The
trace of
flesh and blood
tiredness
on
on
his
his
body
face
had
had
severely
severely
shrunk,
shrunk, priest, and he seemed
She
to have
stared
become
coldly
light as
at
a Soren
feather.
who stood up
A
from the
series
pool.
of data
Her
appeared
expression
crazily,
was ruthless and
affected
cold.
by the legendary
She
spell,
slowly said,
energy drain.
"Human, remember what
Affected
you
by
promised.
negative energy
Otherwise,
corrosion.
the goddess of ocean will
Resistance
also
failed.
take back everything that is
Permanent
given
loss
to you
of
today."
2 profession levels.
Soren stopped.
Affected by
He looked
negative
at his
energy
naked body
corrosion.
and smiled. Resistance
He then
failed.
bowed slightly to
Permanent
show
loss
respect
of
and
2
said,
profession
"I
levels.
will remember the contract I
Affected
promised
by
the sea
negative
goddess.
energy corrosion.
Those who betray her
Resistance
faith will be
failed.
punished."
Permanent
Merciless
loss of 2
punishment.
profession levels.
If those who betrayed
the
their
data
faith
kept
were not
jumping.
punished,
The first
the
thing that
foundation
disappeared
of the
from
sea
Soren's
goddess
believers
believers
would
would
be
be
shadow
affected.
dancer levels.
This was a very
followed
serious
by 2
matter.
rogue levels.
So
and
even
then
if
2
the sea
wizard
temple
levels.
could not
The
directly
crazy
attack
negative
the Storm
energy
Lord
was wreaking
as the
havoc in
priest
his
of the sea
body,
goddess,
reducing
they
his
had to
life
find a
force
way
and
to kill
killing
those
his
who
body.
betrayed their faith.
Soren lost 8
Soren was the
profession
killer levels
they
and
needed.
at the same time, lost hundreds of HP. He directly
Even if
entered a
anyone could
state of
guess
near
that the
death
sea
under
temple
the
was
corrosion
behind
of
this,
negative
as long as
energy.
the people of the sea
His
temple
heartbeat
did
was
not
getting
directly
weaker and
attack,
weaker, and his
the breathing
breathing
gradually
Storm Lord
stopped.
could not turn against
But when
them.
Vivian
There was a
transformed
trace
into
of
her
killing
demonic
intent
form
in
with a
Soren's
sharp
eyes.
cry,
Although
Soren,
he knew
who
that
was
he
in a
might
state
make
of
the
near
followers
death,
of the Storm
suddenly
Lord angry,
opened his eyes.
he did not care so
His
much.
pupils turned
There was
scarlet
no
red.
way to survive
Then
in
it
the
spread
outer
to the
islands
whole
if he was
eyeball,
afraid
and
of
it looked like
everything.
there was no pupil,
Soren
just a
put on the
scarlet
clothes
eyeball.
he took off one by
Soren's
one.
body
The
strangely
Naga
floated,
Siren looked at him
and his
coldly.
whole body made a
After
crackling
Soren
sound.
put on everything,
His
she
originally
slowly said,
withered flesh
"Come
and
with
blood
me.
rapidly
I
expanded,
will tell you all the
and his pale
information
skin
about those
became
who
more and
betrayed
more
their
tough.
faith."
A
And then I will
strange
prepare
tattoo
some
appeared
useful
on his
things for you.
forehead, and
There
his
are
palms
also
turned into
pirates
sharp
secretly
claws.
supported by the temple in Port Tylon.
His
They
skin
will
turned
help you
dark
when you
green,
need them.
and his breath exhaled
But you must
heat
remember
waves.
one thing.
He looked like a demon,
Betrayers
but not
are the most
completely a
hated
demon.
thing by the sea
A
goddess.
row of data
You
suddenly
must kill
appeared.
them all.
Divine
You must
power
not leave a
synchronized
single one
activation.
alive.
Remember,
Activated
you must
Slaughterer
not leave
form.
any alive.
Slaughterer
Otherwise,
form
the sea
activated.
goddess may be
Divinity
dissatisfied.
of fear
The
transformed
Naga
into
Siren
divinity of
repeated the
slaughter.
words not leaving any
Son of
alive
slaughter,
several
form
times in a
activated.
row.
It seemed that she
Bloodline
had a
purity
clear
insufficient.
understanding of the character of the
Slaughter,
sea goddess.
complete form
This was the style
activation
of the
failed.
evil gods.
Divine
Soren was
power
not surprised by
conversion.
this. He nodded
Slaughter,
silently and
half
said,
demon form,
I know.
conversion
Don't leave
completed.
any alive.
Time
No
froze
matter
at this
men or
moment.
women, old or young,
Sauron
there is
slowly
no
opened
mercy
his
in
eyes.
mercy. Vivian's
Those who
face
betray
was
their
full of
faith must
surprise,
pay with their
and
lives.
the gloomy man had an
The Naga
inconceivable
Siren finally
expression.
showed a smile.
He murmured
She
in
looked
a tone
at
of
Soren with
disbelief,
satisfaction,
the breath of
as if she
slaughter.
appreciated his
This
coldness
is the
at
breath
the
of
moment.
slaughterer.
Her voice
Son of
softened a little
slaughter.
and said, "The enemy is a little
Impossible.
tricky, but it is
How
not
can there be a
impossible.
son of slaughter in
There
this
are a lot
world?
of them, so you may need a little strategy. Look, this is their list.
Some
Chapter
of them will
185.
sail at sea soon.
The Sons of
This is a
Slaughter.
good opportunity.
This name had not been mentioned
Maybe you
for
can
a long
sneak
time,
in and kill them all.
because what it represented was disaster, a disaster that even evil feared. The predecessor of the Sons of Slaughter was
Chapter
the divine
192.
Son of Slaughter.
How did you know
A
that I
direct
overslept
descendant of
today?
the three death gods,
The second
and
part
also
is
the
worse.
legendary Son of Slaughter
Outside
with
the
the
sea
strongest
temple.
combat power.
Soren's
The
figure
number of
came out of the
demigods who
darkness.
died in their hands
There was an
more than
emblem
one
in his
hand.
palm,
The number
which was
of given to
pure-blooded
him by the
dragons
Naga
could not even
Siren
be
before
counted
he
with
left.
10 fingers.
This was an
and several
extraordinary
ancient
dragon
dragons
with
had
a
also
special
died.
function. As for
At
the
the
other
same
giants,
time,
it was
beholders,
also
high-level
high-level
demons,
order the pirates
oracles
controlled
from
by
another
the
world
temple
to
to
assist
assist
him.
vampires, and so
This
on.
was a hidden
The total
special
number was
emblem.
probably more than
There were
3
no
digits.
characteristics
It
of
was
the
simply
sea
a
temple on
massacre.
it.
It
The
was
number
just
of
engraved with the little
quasi-legendary and
jellyfish-like
legendary
rune.
professions who
Before
died in the
leaving,
hands
the
of the
Naga
divine
Siren
Son of
leaned
Slaughter
over
was
and
kissed
kissed
Soren's
Soren's
forehead.
forehead.
At
They
the
went on
same
a
time,
killing
she
spree on
whispered
the
a
elven
sentence in
divine
the
tree
sea,
language,
broke through the
This
dark
was a
zone,
blessing
slaughtered
ceremony.
the entire
It was
beholder
not
tribe,
similar to the
and
blessing
even
of
killed
the
some
misfortune
demigods
goddess,
and true gods.
but a weaker version
As for
of
the
the
various
temporary
beholder
blessing.
elders and
It was
tyrants,
said that after
they
being
killed a
kissed
large
on the
number of
forehead
them,
by the priest
including
of the
the
sea
blind
goddess,
god,
even
ancient
if you
red
encounter
dragons,
fierce sea
demigod
monsters
liches,
after entering the
drows,
sea,
and high-level
they may
demons.
not attack you. The number of
This kind of
high-level
blessing
legends
had
who
no
died in the
attribute
hands of the
bonus,
divine Son
unless
of
it was an
Slaughter
official
was
blessing of the
uncountable.
sea goddess.
They killed more
That
than
kind of
one-third
blessing
of
was
the
the real
quasi-legendary and
blessing. You would
legendary
not encounter
creatures that had
storms
been
and waves in the
accumulated on the
sea.
continent
It
for
did not
thousands
matter
of
if you
years.
encountered them.
But they were still
The
not
sea would hold
satisfied.
up your ship and
They
protect
also
you
went
and
on
your
a killing
servants.
spree in the
The
abyss,
sea monsters would
slaughtering
stay
a
away
large
from
group
you,
of
ignore
demons.
you, and never
At
take
that
the
time,
initiative to
almost
attack you.
all the dragons
Even
on the
to a certain
continent were
extent,
killed by
after
them.
meeting certain
How
conditions,
powerful were they?
you could also
There were
order
very
those
few
sea
records
monsters
of
in
the
the
name
divine
of the
Son
sea
of
goddess.
Slaughter.
At
The only
present,
thing that
one
could
of the
be
understood
understood
was
was
the
the
existence
existence
that was now regarded as a grandmaster by the legendary
If the
monk.
Naga Siren
That
did
was
not
the
kiss
legendary
Soren,
monk
he
who
would
taught
immediately
the
be
dark
attacked by the
force,
giant
flaming
octopus in the
pond
pond
outside.
and
But
traceless
now, if he
steps.
jumped in, the
He was
giant
one of the
octopus
divine
would only
Sons of
ignore him.
Slaughter,
And
in
he
the
was not the
future,
most
if he
powerful
encountered
one.
sharks or
There
sea
was a
monsters
record
in
of
the
this
sea,
legendary
these
monk.
sea creatures may
He was
ignore
once
him.
completely
This
immune
was
to
the
the legendary
blessing
spell
of the sea priest.
Time stop.
Generally,
And his
this
magic
kind of
resistance
blessing
could
could
only
reach
be
more than
obtained after a
90%.
god sacrifice
When he
ceremony
burst out,
or
he
after
could
a large
dismantle
amount of
the
money
most
was
powerful
offered.
diamond golem
This
with
was a
his bare
temporary
hands.
blessing, which
Diamond
could last
golem.
for about a week.
Monster level
The emblem
24,
that Soren
Soren
got
got
was
was
characteristics.
It was an
Immunity to most
extraordinary item
spells,
with permanent
physical
spells.
resistance close
It was
to
the
90%,
kind of item that
and
hardly
immunity
increased
to any
combat
weapon
power,
attack below
but sometimes it
transcendent
was very
rank 2.
useful.
From
Item
beginning
type.
to end,
Drowned
more than a
emblem,
million people had
incomplete
died
item,
directly
item
or
grade.
indirectly at the hands
Rare,
of the
grade
divine
2.
Son of Massacre.
Item description.
This group of
This
Sons
is a
of Slaughter
special
had
emblem
even killed a
ornament.
dozen of the
The priest of
apostles
the goddess
god
of
of
lies
ocean
and
permanently
murder,
imprinted
the
the
path
spell.
chosen. Underwater
Everyone, whether
breathing
good or
on it.
evil, had
When
suffered
wearing
heavy
this
losses
equipment,
at their hands.
no creature would die
Cities were
from drowning.
destroyed by them one
It
after
also had a
another.
special ability
The
that could
divine
help
Son
the
of
wearer
Massacre
go
was
deeper
a
into the
nightmare
sea
and reduce the effects of the deep sea on the wearer.
Even though
The
so
emblem
much time
seemed to
had
be a
passed,
part of an item.
the name of the
It was
divine
obvious
child
that it
of
had once
massacre
been
still made
embedded in
many
a piece of
people
equipment.
tremble.
The Son of
Prerequisites.
Slaughter was the
None
descendant of
equipment
the Son of
effect.
Slaughter.
Permanent.
Back then, the
Underwater
Son of
breathing
Slaughter was
spell.
basically all dead. Even if they didn't die, they gradually
The wearer
went into
can breathe in
seclusion
any
after
water
the chaos
environment.
ended.
Special
However, their
effects.
descendants still
Toughness
remained.
in deep sea
As
areas
time
plus
passed,
2.
the blood of
Diving
slaughter
ability
in their bodies
increased,
became thinner
resistance
and
to
thinner.
special sea
In the
environment
end, they were
plus 2.
basically no
In the
different
shadow
from
of the
ordinary
night.
people. Soren frowned
in
and
this
played
world,
with the
there
emblem
was
of
still
the
the
drowned.
possibility of
For some
atavism,
reason,
so
he felt that the
Sons
pattern
of
on it was
Slaughter
a little
would
familiar,
appear from
as if
time
he
to
had seen
time.
it somewhere before.
Especially those
Things
potential
that could
Sons
leave
of
an
Slaughter
impression
who
on
had
him
reached
were
the
not
legendary
legendary
simple,
realm
especially
or
things
obtain
near the sea.
divinity,
In
divine
his memory,
power, or
there were
divinity.
high-grade
These
legendary
sons of
items
slaughter
near the
might
Soros
reawaken
Islands.
the blood of
He
slaughter.
just didn't know if
The
the
power
emblem
of
in his
divinity
hand had
strengthened
anything to
their
do with
thinning
that item.
bloodline.
It was
turning them
obviously
into
a
a
part of an
weakened version
item,
of the
and
son of
Soren
slaughter.
couldn't tell if there
They
were
were
no
also
other
that
parts.
sons of
If
slaughter
it was really a
in
part
other
of that
people's
item, it
mouths,
was worth Soren's
since the
risk
god
to
of
try.
murder fell into
Because the
madness
power
and
of that
sealed,
item was
the
almost
divinity of
comparable to an
slaughter and
artifact.
the divinity in the
It
field
could
of
also
reproduction
summon
had
a
always been
legendary
the main
deep sea
force that
monster
the
at
evil
a
gods
critical
fought
moment.
for, but
That
in
thing
fact,
was simply
no one
heaven
had been able
defying
to
at
fuse
sea.
the divinity of
To put it
slaughter.
more
This
exaggeratedly,
also
he
led
could
to the
kill a
thinning of
pirate
the
king's
bloodline
fleet
of the
by
son of
himself.
slaughter, Soren was
long as
full
there
of
was a
energy.
sudden atavism,
He didn't even
it
have
was
the thought
possible
of
to
sleeping.
regain the blessing
So he
of
didn't rush
divinity
back
and
to the
divine
inn.
power.
Instead, he
The Sons
tested
of
his
Slaughter
ability
once
a little.
appeared densely
He
for a
held a
period
kindler
of time
between
during
his
the
fingers.
Arcane Empire,
The kindler
but they
rolled
rarely
on his
appeared in the
fingertips
recent
at an
hundreds of
astonishing
years.
speed.
Divine
In the
power
end, it almost
transformed.
turned into a
The
shadow.
divinity of fear
When he clenched his
transformed into
hand,
the divinity
the
of
kindler had
slaughter.
disappeared and
Soren's
emerged from his
attributes
other
changed
hand.
dramatically,
It was
almost
beyond
in
the
the
limit
blink
of
of
the
an eye.
retina, and the biggest
Even
change
Soren
was his
himself
main
couldn't see
attribute,
his own small
Name,
and swift
Soren,
movements.
son of
The
slaughter.
dexterity of his
Race,
hands was almost
slaughter,
comparable
half
to the
demon
top
form.
magicians in his previous
Attributes.
life. Strength
And this was
20
only a
plus
part of the
6,
legendary
dexterity
skill,
24
omnipotent
plus
hands.
2.
Of course, the test was more than
23
that.
plus 2.
Soren still
Intelligence
couldn't test
20
the omnipotent
plus
hand's
1.
ability to
Wisdom
use any
15,
equipment,
charm 18
so he could only
plus
try
2.
to improve his thief
Special
skills
talent.
after his recovery
Slaughter
ability.
form.
In
When
theory,
you
with the
transform
omnipotent
into a
hands,
slaughterer,
even if
your
the thief
thief
skill
skill
wasn't
very
comprehensively
high,
improved,
it could reach the level of a
strength
thief.
plus 4,
Because
the
dexterity
plus
of his
2,
hands was so
constitution
high,
plus
the dexterity
2,
bonus
wisdom
it could
plus
provide
2,
was more
combat
amazing than the
ability
skill
is
points.
equivalent to a warrior
Looks like
of the
I've
same
recovered
level,
my dagger
and
skills.
resistance to any
The dagger
abnormal
in
status
Soren's hand
increases
left
by
a
10
trail of
points.
afterimages,
Special
then
talent,
disappeared into the
slaughtering
black silk
will.
glove.
The desire
His best
to kill
weapon
him
was
the
the curved
curved
sword, but it
and
was
you
a
will be
combat
immune
weapon.
to most mind control
Soren's
spells,
second best
including
weapon was
but
the
not
dagger.
limited to charm,
Not only
fear,
was it
mind
useful in
control, and so
combat,
on, but it could also
special
be used
talent,
in many other ways.
slaughtering desire.
For example, the scene
After
in front of him.
transforming into a
Two
slaughterer,
patrolling guards
you will be
walked
affected
past
by the
Soren.
desire to
A
kill.
cold light flashed
You will
in his
become
hand.
extremely sensitive
His
to
fingers
blood,
instantly
and your
turned
perception
into
of
a blur,
anything related
and then
to
he
slaughter
brushed
will be
past them
strengthened.
as if nothing had
But
happened.
after transforming
The
into a
distance between
slaughterer,
them
you
increased
must
by
kill
50
at least
meters.
one target to
A money
satisfy the
pouch
desire
appeared
to
in
kill in
Soren's
your
hand.
heart.
Otherwise,
He
you will
lightly
enter a
waited in
state
his
of
hand, then put it
madness.
away.
The patrolling guard was still
This
walking
desire
forward.
to kill will gradually increase with the number of transformations you undergo.
He didn't even know when
Soren
the inner
suddenly
lining of
opened
his
his
clothes
eyes.
had been cut open,
His scarlet
and when the
pupils
money
were
pouch
full of
hanging
killing
on his
intent,
waist had been
and
stolen.
the darkness could not
His
block
outer
his
leather
vision.
armor was still
All
intact,
living and dead
but the
creatures
inner
were
lining near
captured
the
in
money
his
pouch
vision.
had been cut open.
He instantly jumped
If he
out,
hadn't suddenly
and his speed
remembered
was almost so
something, or if
fast
someone
that he
else
almost
had
pulled out
reminded
his
him,
shadow.
he probably
The legendary
wouldn't have
curved
realized
sword
that he had
icing
been
death
robbed
appeared
until
in
he
his
finished
right hand,
patrolling, and another
Sure
curved
enough,
sword
the
appeared in his
omnipotent
left
hands
hand.
is the best choice
Soren's
for a thief.
figure suddenly spun,
What Soren
and when he
cared about
rushed
was
to
not
the
the
front of
money
the
at all,
enemy, there was
nor
a
the
flash of
omnipotent
light.
hand's ability to
The
steal.
overwhelming sword
The
light
patrolling
shrouded
guards
the
were
target,
all close
and
to grade
Soren
2
slashed out
professions.
10 times in a
Just
second.
now, he was
The
able to
high-grade
quietly
mage's
cut
armor
a hole in the
shattered
guard's
like an
clothes.
eggshell.
If
The
Soren
energy
wanted to,
shield on
he
the
could
cold
also
man's
silently
body
use the
couldn't even
dagger to
hold for half
instantly
a
pierce
second.
their kidneys,
Five
then
more
cause them
wounds
to
appeared
bleed
on his
profusely,
body,
and then
blood
die in a
suddenly
short
soaked
period of
through his
time.
clothes. He didn't even need
Lock
to use
command,
stealth. He could
reinforced
directly injure
iron
or even
bones.
kill the target before
Lesser
they could
spell
react.
nullification barrier.
This was the bonus of being
Greater
the first
energy
to attack.
shield.
Although there was
Greater
no
energy
specific
damage
data,
protection.
the bonus of 5 points for
consecutive
being the
spells
first to
appeared
attack
on the
seemed to
gloomy
exist.
man's body due to
Soren's speed
serendipity,
was much
and a
faster
piece
than
of
other
equipment
people.
was suddenly
Among
activated.
all the melee professions,
Sauron's next
rogues would
attack
attack
was
as
as
if
if
he
he
had
had
slashed on steel.
Even monks couldn't compare to them.
Intimidate
Monks were
was
better at
directly
short bursts
resisted
of
by
continuous
him,
attacks.
but the greater energy
Soren
shield that
returned
was
to the
activated
hotel.
continuously
It was late at the
blocked all
moment,
15
but
of his
there were
attacks.
still many people in
This
the
was a
hotel's
level
lobby.
8 spell, which
When
was
Soren
once
opened the
jokingly
door,
called
the
Golden
Amazonian
Bell
women
Shield.
who were drinking in
It
the
was an
lobby looked
all-around
up.
defensive
One of them
protection
seemed to
spell.
be the strong
It was
woman who
directly
fought in
immune
the
to
tavern
physical
during the
attacks
day.
with a strength
She
of
seemed to
less
be
than
mocking
50
how she
points.
beat up the group
It
of
was
men
difficult
today,
for Soren
and
to
then
break
beat them
through
up
the
until
energy
they were
shield
all
while
listless.
holding 2 curved
The
swords.
other party spoke in an
Occasionally, an
Amazonian
attack
dialect,
broke through the
and
shield
Soren
and hit the
basically
opponent,
couldn't understand,
making a metallic
He
sound.
could only guess the meaning from the vague words.
Soren let out
One
a
of
low
the women
roar
was
and
the
turned into
executioner
shadow.
who molested
The
Soren
surface
today.
of his skin was
She
covered
had
with
changed her
shadow
clothes
energy,
now,
and his
the
whole
other party
person
was
looked like
wearing
a
clothes
shadow.
similar to a
The
battle
little girl's
group,
reaction
but
was
the outside
extremely
armor was
fast.
removed.
Just as
Inside
Soren
was
rushed
a leather
out,
shirt,
she had already
and half
begun
of
to
her
prepare
full
to cast
breast
a
could be
spell.
seen.
In
The
an
Amazonian
instant, she
women were
opened her shield
relatively
and at the
strong,
same time
and belonged to the
chanted
kind
a
of
spell
women
and
full
raised
of
her hand to
wildness.
throw out an
Their
energy
breasts
whip.
were not as soft as
Kelvin's
other
whip
women,
of protection,
but they were definitely
A dark
firm and
energy
full of
whip
elasticity.
appeared in Vivian's white
This group
little
of
hand.
women only had muscles
She violently
left.
swung it at
Basically,
the cold man in front
all
of
the
her.
women in front of
The
him
moment
had
it
more
touched the
obvious
opponent,
muscle contours
the
on their
energy shield
arms.
had already
They were
dissipated.
not as exaggerated as
Then the energy
bodybuilders,
whip wrapped
but they
around
were
his
definitely
body,
stronger
and the
than
dark
ordinary
energy
men's
eroded
arms.
the energy
The
shield.
average strength of
This
the
was a
Amazonian
special
women
dispelling
was about
spell
14
attack,
to 16
which could last
points.
for a period of
In
time
other
and
words,
dispel
although the
3
muscles on
defensive
this
spells
group of
below
women were
level
not
9.
very exaggerated,
Dimensional
most
lock.
of them had a good
The cold
bloodline,
man clearly
and their
felt the
strength
danger.
was almost higher
The
than
sudden
Soren's.
burst of power
When
from
she saw
Soren
Soren,
and the transformed
a playful
Vivian
smile
almost left her
appeared on
no
the
time
corner
to
of her
cast a
mouth.
spell.
And then
She
she
could only rely
words
on
to
his
the other
equipment
women in
and the
Amazonian
defensive means
dialect.
prepared by accident to protect himself.
Soren
He
didn't know what
decisively
she
wanted
said,
to use a
but the other women
teleportation spell,
immediately laughed
but
for
a
a
faint
while,
white light
and then
appeared on
glanced
his
at
body,
Soren with a
and then his
strange
figure
playful
stayed in
gaze.
place.
Many of them
Vivian
were
had
looking at his
already
lower
sealed
body,
the surrounding
whispering
space,
something in their
directly
companion's
restricting
ears
the
with some
effect of
kind
all
of mischievous
teleportation
smile.
spells.
And then there was a
Vivian's
burst of
casting
inexplicable
speed was far
laughter.
faster than his.
Soren couldn't help but
Spells
frown.
under 3 seconds
He was a
were
little
basically
dissatisfied with
instantaneous.
the other party's
The
attitude.
effect of this was very
Even
amazing
the
in
female
battle.
drows knew to
The
respect
gloomy man
strong
in front of her
males,
had just
and the
finished casting
Amazonian
a
woman
spell,
in front of him
and
was
Vivian
too
had already
unscrupulous.
thrown out an
He had
advanced
to
spell
show a
that was
little of his
above level
strength
6,
or they would
and
think
an
that he was
intermediate
weak
spell
and
that
easy
was
to
below
bully.
level 6.
Soren had a
If it
cold
wasn't for the
smile
fact
on the
that
corner
her
of his
opponent
mouth,
had cast a weak spell
he slowly walked
nullification
in front
barrier
of the
that made him
female
immune to level
executioner,
1 to 3
then looked at
spells,
her, who was
she could have
slightly
even
drunk,
thrown
and
out
said
more than
slowly,
10 low-level
"Are you
spells
interested
in
in
one go."
performing a magic
Greater
trick with me?"
disjunction. The woman
The
with
little
long
girl's
dark
white
red
fingers
hair
stood
shot
up
out
with
with
interest,
and
as
the
if she was
equipment on
not
the
afraid
cold
of
man's
Soren
body
at all.
suddenly turned into
Sure.
powder.
Are you still
He
a
couldn't
bard?
even activate it in an instant.
Can you sing?
All that
Do you
was
wanna
left
sing
on
me
his
a
body
song?
was the defensive
Soren
effect
didn't
of
say
reinforced
anything.
iron bones.
When the woman in front of
Soren
him stood
waved
up,
his two
he
swords
suddenly
and turned
narrowed
into a
his
shadow,
eyes,
and then
the
a cold
cold
man's
light
body
slid
was
through his
slashed up and
fingertips,
down by him,
followed by a
when
series of
reinforced iron
afterimages.
bones could no
When
longer
Soren
withstand
withdrew his
Soren's
fingers and
attack,
turned to
he
leave,
let out a
he
shrill
left a
scream.
group of stunned
The
Amazonian
legendary
warriors,
curved sword
and a
icing
naked
death
woman
directly
with a
cut
dazed
through his
expression,
waist.
almost
She seemed
cutting
to have
him
just
in half.
sobered up, and she
A
had
row of
goosebumps
data
all
appeared.
over her body.
You have learned
She
something
was
in the
naked,
battle,
and the ground under
As the
her
number
feet
of
was
battles
covered with
increases,
clothes.
you have
They
mastered
didn't
some
even
of the
see
skills
clearly
of
that their
sword
companion in
form,
front of them had
waist
been
cut.
stripped naked. A golden
Soren
light
calmly
flashed
walked
across
to the
the
stairs,
sky, and then
the
as if he
figure of the
remembered
Saint
something,
Necromancer
he turned
appeared
around
around.
and said,
"Oh,
he frowned and
that's
looked
right.
at the demigod
This magic
vampire,
trick is called
then
stripping."
glanced at Soren and the
After
others.
that, he calmly
In the
left.
end, he still
All that
focused
was
on
left
the
was a
demigod
group of
vampire.
female Amazon
Obviously,
warriors
the
who had
target
yet
was
to
more
recover from
threatening.
their shock.
The Saint Necromancer cast his spell at an astonishing speed, and soon, a glittering teleportation gate appeared in the sky. Chapter 193. Then an angel-like There was creature still in golden armor
in the
walked
hall.
out. One of the
Angel
female
from another
Amazons
world.
picked up the battle
Legendary
skirt on the ground
spell
with a shocked
as a
expression.
priest of the goddess of
After
wealth,
looking at the
other
neatly
party
cut belt,
summoned
she
the angel
murmured,
of heaven.
"What a fast speed! How was this a stripping technique?" It was simply because the
Chapter
opponent's speed
186.
was too fast. Not good. Before they could react,
Soren's
he
pupils
had already
shrank
stripped
slightly.
off their companions'
He
clothes.
instantly waved his
And when he
curved
cut the
sword and
belt of the
slashed
battle
upwards.
skirt and the inner
At the
shirt
same
belt,
time,
he
did
twisted
not
his
cut the
body
skin
and
of their
slashed at
companion
the
at all.
opponent's neck. This kind of
As blood
accuracy and
splattered
speed
out,
was
the
completely
gloomy man's head
incredible
was
to them.
directly chopped
The
off.
red-haired woman
The headless
shuddered
corpse
after
fell
Soren
to the
stopped,
ground,
and her
because
whole
of the
body was
unknown
covered with
vitality.
goosebumps.
It moved for a
She
while,
felt the
and
cold
then
touch of
gradually
the tip
stopped
of the sword
twitching.
on her skin.
A row of
but it
data
did not
quickly
directly
appeared.
cut the surface
Target
of the
killed.
skin. This was a
Extracting
skill that they
soul
could not
energy.
understand at all.
You've gained
An Amazon
4,500
woman with long
slaughter
brown
EXP.
hair took a deep breath
Target
and
is a
slowly said,
divine creature.
"What a powerful rogue.
Extracting
Report
target's
him to the
divine
higher-ups
power.
and receive
You've
him
gained
carefully.
3 divinity.
We don't need to offend
Target
this kind
has
of
the
person.
divine power of
He may be
fear.
useful in the future." Extraction of the divine
Strength was
power
the
of
only
fear
way to gain
failed.
respect.
Divinity
Even the
storage
female
failed.
Amazons who liked
Divinity
to suppress
storage
males
failed.
to inflate their ego
You don't
knew
have
that
any
they should
divinity
respect
level
men who
or
were
divinity
strong
field
enough.
to store
These
the divine
women were
power of
despicable.
fear. If you didn't
Target's
let them
divine
understand
power
what
of
fear
strength
has been
was
transferred,
these women would always
the
look at
cold
you
man
with
was
contempt.
directly beheaded
If the
by
drows
Soren,
were the killers
but the
among the
divine
females,
power in his body
then the
did not
Amazons
seem to
were
be
the
stronger than
hooligans
the
among the
elven
females.
ranger. To
Soren
deal with
only
this
got
kind
a
of woman,
divinity,
you should
and at
whip
the
them
same
when you
time,
need to,
the divine
and
power
slap them in
began
the
to
face when you
transfer
need
to
to.
others.
Otherwise,
He was a little
they would be
worried
even
that the
more
divine
unscrupulous.
power would be transferred
Only
to
when
the
you show your
demigod
strength,
vampire,
these women will
but it
give you
seemed
the
that there was
respect
a
you
connection
deserve.
between him and
On the
Vivian.
stairs, the other
Soren
party's
put away
divine
his
power
palm,
was
and there was a
obviously
playful
transferred
smile
to
on his
Vivian,
mouth.
and then the
He
little
seemed to be
girl's
talking
figure
to himself.
directly floated up.
I finally got
The
back some
power
of
of
the
the
feeling
three
of the
demigods
past,
was
but I don't know
fusing.
when I can reach
Vivian's
the level where the
expression seemed to
legendary
show a
blade
trace
master
of
used a
pain.
straight blade to
Her
block
petite
bullets
body
in the
trembled
battle of
slightly,
golems,
and
but
suddenly
the
fell
distance
from
should
the
not be
sky.
too far, right?
The fusion failed. When I was at my
Soren's
peak, I
expression
should be able
changed
to remove
slightly.
the other party's
After
clothes
killing
and
the
shave her
demigod
lower
of
body
fear,
hair as well.
the desire to
It
kill in
seems
his
that there
heart
is still a
subsided,
big gap,
and he actually felt
Soren
full.
certainly did not have such
He rushed
peak
over
skills
to
now.
catch Vivian,
Shaving
who fell
would
from the
definitely
air,
cut the
and then
target's
retreated
skin.
with her in his
Legendary
arms.
skill. The demigod
Any
vampire
ability
was
with
the
a legendary
legendary
mark
the
was
silver
definitely
hand
not
was the
simple,
most powerful
let alone
paladin,
the specialty
and the
of a
Saint
rogue.
Cardinal was in the
After
form of a
Soren
saint,
recovered his
which was also
omnipotent
close
hands
to
to
the
the
strength of a
although
demigod.
his profession
This
level was
situation
only
was
around
very
grade 3,
unfavorable for
his
them
real
because
combat
Soren
power
and
could
Vivian
reach
had
the
almost
level of
no
grade
allies.
4 or above.
The silver hand
As
could
long as
attack
he took
them,
one
and
more
the Saint
step
Cardinal
forward,
could also attack
he
them.
estimated that he
It
would
could
be
be
able
said
to
that
reach
the
the
half
strength
vampire
of a
couldn't wait to kill
quasi-legendary
them
tier
here
at
at
the
the
4th
fourth
step.
step. If he had
The
not
speed
been
of his
entangled
strength
by the
improvement
silver
would be
hand,
much faster
the
than in the
oracle from
past.
another world
It was a pity that he didn't have the evasion intuition ability, and he didn't have the triple evasion ability. The demigod vampire immediately became a little bad. At the same time, the divine artifact still couldn't reach his peak strength that the silver hand was holding suddenly without superior perception. The light could he master the power to destroy everything, and it directly purified all the shadow spirits within a 300-meter radius. After taking a glance at the scene in the room, which was illuminated by the strong light, quickly walked towards Vivian. Sizzling sound. The scene in front of him was a little frightening. Vivian's petite body was floating about spells against evil creatures and undead. She was wearing a black sometimes more effective than legendary spells, and her hair was gently dancing in the wind. There were obviously
demigod
other things
vampire's
floating
body
around
was
her,
charred,
such as tables,
but his
chairs,
flesh and
wooden
blood were
stools,
recovering at
accessories,
an
and so
amazing
on.
speed.
Her divine
The
power was
legendary
out of
spell,
control.
vampiric feast,
This was not the
was
first
still
time
in
Soren
effect.
had seen it. This degree
Sometimes
of injury
the
could
little
not
girl
kill
would
him at all.
inexplicably fly when
Demigods
she was
were a
sleeping
very
at
special
night.
kind of existence.
Sometimes even
They
Soren
had
might
divinity
fly
and
and
divine
sometimes
power.
it would cause damage.
They might even have
However,
divinity,
when Soren
but
was
they
by
didn't
her
have the
side,
corresponding
the number of
divine
times she
title.
lost control
That
of her
was to
divine
say,
power was
demigods
obviously
had
much
no
less.
believers and no
There seemed to be an
corresponding domain
invisible
of divinity
energy field in the room.
Divinity was a very
Soren put all
important
the
part of the
suspended
gods.
things back on the ground,
Only with the
then
corresponding
reached out and
divinity
hugged
could one be
Vivian's small
regarded
body
as a
in his
true
arms.
god.
The
Therefore,
little girl was
many
still
gods
sleeping,
killed each other,
but she seemed to
and
be
the
able
core
to
power
perceive
of the
the
competition
outside world.
was the domain
Her
of the other
expression
party's
became
divinity.
soft, and
This
her
was the
breathing
source of
gradually
divine
became
power
stable.
and the source of
She was
improving
actually
divinity.
conscious and perceptive.
Only after obtaining
It was
the
just that
corresponding
Soren couldn't be
divinity
sure
could the
why she
gods
was
be
sleeping.
regarded as having
The
a
last
complete
time she
cycle of
slept like
divine
this for a
power.
long time,
The
she
demigod
didn't wake up
vampire
until a
had the
certain
divine
time.
power of
Give
fear
me a little
and the
more
divinity
time.
of fear.
Soren
It was
reached
even
out and
possible
hugged
that he
Vivian's
had a
small
weak
body in
divinity.
his arms,
But
then
after
leaned
all,
over
he was
and
not
kissed
the
her
god of
forehead
fear,
and slowly
and the
said,
divinity of
"I
fear
still
was
don't have
not
the
on him.
confidence to completely
Many
suppress
powerful
the
liches
divinity
could
of fear.
transform themselves
I
into
need some time
demigod
to
liches,
prepare.
but very few
It won't
liches
take
could
too
truly
long, I
become
promise."
gods.
This was
got
because
up
if
and
they
covered
wanted
the
to
sleeping
obtain a
little girl
divine
with a
position,
blanket,
they
then
had to
sat
kill
next
other
to her
gods
and
and
stroked her
transform
long
their own
hair.
domain into
The
divine
invisible
positions.
energy field
Then,
around them
through a
gradually
slow
dissipated,
process, they would
and
have to
everything
fuse
seemed
with
to
the
have
divine
returned to
positions
normal.
that they could transform
Soren
into.
silently took out a
At that
scroll
time,
and looked at it.
they would be regarded as real
he would
gods
look
and
at
could
the
develop
sky
their
outside.
believers on a large
Since
scale.
he had agreed to the request of
Unfortunately,
the sea
so far,
priest,
there
he
were
had
only
to
a
do
few
it.
liches who could
Otherwise,
become
he
gods.
might be cursed by
Most
the
of
sea
them were
goddess.
used by other
The other
gods and
party
given a
didn't give
small
him a
number
long
of weak
time,
divinities.
and Soren wasn't
Demigods
interested
could
in wasting
condense
too much
divinities
time.
by developing
It was a
believers.
group of merchants who
However,
betrayed
in
their
this
faith,
process they would
and
be
behind
called
them was
false
the
gods,
Duchess of the
and they were the
Principality
main
of
targets
Rosser.
of many gods.
Soren had heard
If
of
they
this
wanted
woman.
to condense
Not only
divinities
was
that
she
were
similar
beautiful,
to or
but he
similar
had
to
also
other
heard of
gods,
her
they
amazing
might be
wealth
attacked
and her
endlessly.
extremely vicious heart.
Since ancient times,
It was said that
most
the
of
old
the
Duke of the
demigods had reached
Principality
the
of
level of
Rosser
saints
was
and
poisoned
chosen.
to death by her.
There were very few
Of course,
who were
this was
qualified
only
to
a
be called
rumor, false
but
gods.
now she was the ruler
Unless
of
there
the
were
duchy.
gods who were willing
She
to
was
give
the
up
third
part of
wife
their
of the
power
old
and
duke.
transfer some
The old
divinities
duke's
to the
sons had all
demigod.
been killed by her,
Why is
one
this
by
happening?
one.
Now
Soren
only the
blocked
little
the
princess
strong
was
light of
left.
sunburst with his body and flew out of the domain.
Vivian's
The
current
reason why
situation
Soren
was a bit
remembered this
similar
woman
to the
was that
last
many
time.
people called her
After
a
absorbing the
character
power of the son
and
of
a lot
fear,
more ruthless.
she directly fainted.
Later on, this
Soren
woman
was not
launched
very
a war
clear
against
about
the
the
other
reason for this
principalities,
situation,
and
but
almost
the root
unified
may be
the
related
southwest
to the divine
countries.
power.
She came
Under
from an
normal
ancient sorcerer
circumstances,
family,
Vivian
and had
should
a
have
very
absorbed
deep
the
background.
divinity.
It
But now
seemed
the
that
divinity
sorcerer
had been
families
transferred
could
to
easily
Soren's
cultivate
body.
people with
If
strange
Vivian's
temperaments.
divinity could not
Maybe
control
it was
the
because
divine
they had
power,
to step into
then it would
many
be very
forbidden
difficult
areas
to
in order to
integrate the
maintain
divine
the
purity
purity
of their
fear.
bloodline.
But the
This
divinity
woman
could
was
not
not
be
simple.
absorbed by Vivian.
She had been desperately accumulating wealth, and at the same time secretly recruited many adventurers from the evil faction. The reason why the merchants betrayed their faith was very simple, and that was for more benefits. Although the goddess of ocean could bless their ships to sail on the sea, she could not bring more benefits. This group of people changed their faith to the Lord of Storms because they wanted to open up a trade route in the tropical rainforest area, and strengthen the trade cooperation with the rainforest area through the faith of the Lord of Storms. They needed the gold of the Soros Islands. As long as the faith of the Lord of Storms opened the way, they could trade with any town or tribe on the Soros Islands that believed in the Lord of Storms. After all, the sea goddess' faith on land was definitely not as strong as the Lord of Storms. The Lord of Storms also had the ability to protect the ships at sea, so that his believers could avoid the damage of the storm, and at the same time, use the divine imprint to deter the sea monsters. All of this was for more benefits. However, they probably did not expect the sea goddess to retaliate so soon. The other party betrayed their faith during this period of time, and the opportunity to betray their faith might be because they lost contact with the gods during this period of time. If the sea goddess also fell asleep, they might be able to escape punishment and anger. However, they obviously underestimated the revenge of the goddess believers. The night was getting darker. Soren put away the file and glanced at Vivian. He leaned over and kissed her on the cheek and then said, "I'll be back soon." After that, he turned and opened the window and then quietly left. Shortly after Soren left, Vivian's petite body floated up again. The window that was closed before he left trembled slightly, and then objects floated up to a height of 3 feet. The whole room was once again shrouded by an invisible force. If Gloria was here, she would find everything so familiar. It was because she lost control of her divine power that she opened an energy shield to isolate Vivian's power. The suspended objects were slowly flying, and Vivian's petite body gradually floated to the center. Under the
bright moonlight. Soren moved closer to the port. The caravan controlled by the Duchess was very powerful, and there might be high-grade wizards in it. She owned a lot of minerals and had been secretly smuggling arms, slaves, food and so on.
She controlled the power of the Principality of Rossard, but all the profits from the trade fell into her private pocket. The internal finances of the Principality were still tight. There were rumors that the army of the Principality of Rossard was not as strong as her personal guards. Soren was not very clear about her strength. He only knew that she had 5 private legions under her name. No one had seen her fight, but some guessed that she was a dragon disciple. The port was very quiet. At this time almost everyone was asleep. Soren moved along the shadows and gradually approached the location of the target chamber of commerce. The other party had 7 large ships, and the number of sailors and guards was more than 500 people. This was a tricky task. 5 of the ships had already set off after the last sacrifice of the gods, and the ones left in Port Tylon were other people. Soren's first goal was to kill these people, completely destroy their stronghold, and then kill them all when the others came back. The pirates under the control of the Sea Temple had spread out, and as soon as the fleet came back, he would receive the news immediately. There were guards standing guard at the Chamber of Commerce's station. Soren quietly crept over, and then a cold light flashed, and a body with its throat cut was gently placed on the ground by him. Soren gently landed on the roof with his curved swords, and then smeared the venom of the wyvern on the swords. Then he loaded the crossbow one by one, and then put the throwing swords into the master battlemaster gloves. With a light leap he landed in the courtyard. Then he slipped back into the shadows and quietly approached the patrolling guards. He did not alarm anyone. This was just an appetizer, and the real hunt had just begun. Chapter 194. Under the cold moonlight. 2 guards of the Rossad Chamber of Commerce were patrolling. Because the Chamber of Commerce had stored a lot of goods, the security here had always been very tight. It was quite tiring at this time. 2 guards of the caravan were chatting, talking about which house in Port Tylon had the prettiest prostitutes. Basically, starting from middle age, these people who relied on force to make a living would turn to more stable jobs. The caravan went out to sea with some young guards, and the more mature ones were used to stay behind and guard because they had more experience. The shadow in the darkness twisted. The older guard, who might be in his 40s, stopped in his tracks. His intuition was strong after a long time of fighting, and he almost immediately wanted to pull out his weapon. Unfortunately, it was too late. A scimitar with a cold gleam pierced through his back, almost coming out of his body. Then, another scimitar swung towards the person next to him, chopping off his head on the spot and breaking it in half. Because he used his left hand, Soren did not directly cut off the head. He only cut off the neck bone, and there was still a piece of flesh attached to the neck. The whole bloody head was hanging on the back, and it would be cut off by another 3 centimeters. Blood gushed out in large amounts. Soren raised his leg to support the fallen body with a cold expression, avoiding the obvious sound of collision. He gently pulled out the curved sword, and then dragged the 2 bodies to the corner. So far he had not found enough enemies to threaten him. The enemies he had killed so far were at grade 3. Except for a more troublesome trap near the warehouse, most of the people had fallen asleep. Many of them were strong ordinary people, and the main force of the caravan seemed to have gone out to sea. Soren had killed 26 people. The smell of blood in the air had become much stronger. If someone woke up, they might be discovered. There was not much time left for him. The cold killing intent was gathering little by little. Every time he killed an enemy, the cold light in Soren's eyes condensed. He had no mercy in his heart. After quietly entering a room, he immediately waved his sword and killed the 5 people sleeping inside. One of them seemed to have woken up, but before he could react, a cold light had already chopped off his head. Soren quietly sheathed his sword and retreated. The courtyard was quite large and he had to kill the other targets as soon as possible. Who? The smell of blood was getting stronger and stronger, and it finally alerted the experts in the Chamber of Commerce. In the backyard, a fierce-looking man suddenly opened his eyes and picked up the weapon beside the bed. He pushed open the door and looked around. He immediately let out a loud shout. Then a chaotic sound rang out nearby. Following that, a dozen men holding swords and weapons rushed out with disheveled clothes. This man seemed to be an important figure in the Chamber of Commerce. The others gathered around him. At the same time he ordered, "Enemy invasion! Wake the others up!" The shadow behind him twisted. An inexplicable chill made all the hairs on his body stand on end, and he couldn't help but feel stiff. When he lowered his head to look at his chest, a machete had already pierced through his heart. The bone-piercing chill seeped into his blood vessels, and he could see wisps of frost appearing on the wound. Soren didn't cover his face. Since he wanted to kill all the targets, there was no need for him to cover his face. After finishing off the warrior who was about grade 3, Soren raised his finger and shot out a wave of arcane missiles. A thug who couldn't react in time was instantly hit in the head. His nose was directly blown off, and the center of his face was caved in. This was just an ordinary person. Maybe it was a warrior who had just advanced. Such an enemy couldn't even take one hit from him. Brute strength. Although he killed the leader of the Chamber of Commerce in one hit, the number of people alone still gave the other guards a little courage. Obviously, someone wanted to sound the alarm bell, but unfortunately he was shot dead by Soren's crossbow. Omnipotent hands enhanced his accuracy, and he shot the enemy in the head on the spot. Soren pulled out his other curved sword and dashed toward the dozen or so guards in front of him. He leaped up and stepped on the roof beam, causing the beam to tremble. In an instant, his curved sword slashed through the air and slit the throats of 2 of the guards. A trace of fear spread. Obviously, many people were frightened, and at the same time, some wanted to escape and ask for help. Soren's expression was quite cold. He directly rushed toward the enemies who were 10 times his number, and then blood splattered in the sky and broken limbs fell to the ground. After a minute and a half, Soren sheathed his sword. Behind him were 12 corpses with their throats cut. There was a scream of horror in the dark, which alarmed the other chambers of commerce nearby, but it seemed that no one dared to come over. The smell of blood in the air had become very strong. Soren took out the crossbow expressionlessly and shot the target, who screamed. There were not many living people left. He glanced around coldly, then lit a torch and threw it directly toward the warehouse. The mission given by the Naga Siren priest was to kill all of them. He did not have much time to clean up the battlefield. He could only pick up some valuable things and take them away, then kill the rest of the targets. This was only the first clearing point. He had to burn the ships in the port later. It must be done within half an hour. Otherwise, the guards of Port Tylon may be dispatched. Although he was helping the Sea Temple deal with the betrayers, it was not suitable to fight directly with the guards. Port Tylon, the port. Soren threw the corpse with its throat cut into the sea, and then jumped to the surface of the sea. He jumped from a height of more than 10 meters, but he did not fall into the sea. Instead, he jumped directly on the surface of the sea, and then jumped 10 meters away as if he was stepping on the ground. This was the power of levitation. This spell was used by wizards to levitate, but for rogues, it had the effect of a top-notch lightness skill. Soren did not need to be completely levitated. He only needed to levitate to transfer the force, and he could complete many super difficult movements. For example, the ability to climb was considered useless by many people. But for Soren, as long as he jumped, he could grab an object with one hand and jump 360 degrees, and a group of enemies below would be stunned. Many basic abilities could not be ignored in battle. Rumble. There was a loud noise, and then 2 large ships turned into a sea of fire. One of them had begun to sink. Soren frowned and looked at the blood all over his body, and then disappeared into the darkness. The first wave of cleansing today had been completed. Presumably, his performance should be able to satisfy the Naga Siren priest because there were almost no survivors tonight. Soren's targets were about to reach 3 digits. Once upon a time, he was also able to dance unparalleled in the crowd. Port Tylon was not calm today. Because people had died last night and many of them had died. The stronghold of the Rosad Chamber of Commerce near the port was completely wiped out. There were more than 50 people inside and not a single one was left alive. Most of them had their throats slit. There was almost no trace of resistance throughout the entire process. It was almost a one-sided massacre. Moreover, at dawn their ship, which was docked near the harbor, caught fire. The sailors on board were either burned to death or had their throats slit. Only a few people who went out to seek pleasure survived, but they were already scared out of their wits and no one knew where they were hiding. The whole Port Tylon was shaken. Overnight, the name Throat Cutter spread throughout the port, causing many vicious and merciless bastards to tremble. Nearly 100 lives were lost. To be able to kill so many people in one night, it was definitely a quasi-legendary assassin. There was no trace of a large-scale attack at the scene. The killer could be just one person. People with discerning eyes could see that there was the shadow of the Sea Temple behind this, because the guards of Port Tylon were just cleaning up the mess and had no intention of catching the murderer. The only ones who moved were the followers of the Storm Lord. After all, the group of merchants had converted to the Storm Lord. If they did not do anything, it would definitely dampen the enthusiasm of the followers. People with a little eyesight knew that this was a competition between the 2 temples. No one would be crazy enough to get involved in such a battle. Because it was too dangerous. The Sea Temple. Soren's figure appeared in the shadows. The Naga Siren had been waiting here for a long time. There was a smile on her dark green face and she said slowly, "Very good. I am very satisfied with your efficiency. This group of betrayers deserves such a thunderous punishment. You don't have to worry about the other fish that escaped the net. I will arrange for people to kill them. You need to be careful recently. The followers of the Storm Lord seem to be on the move. They are tracking down who killed the group of betrayers. But it doesn't matter too much. The power of the sea goddess cannot be underestimated. They will not directly attack you. At most, they will hire some adventurers. I will secretly send people to help you, and the other party will not dare to fight openly. The faith of the goddess has been stabilized. Those who were ready to change their faith have all been honest. It seems that they should understand the consequences of betraying the faith of the sea goddess. You come with me. You should be rewarded for your performance last night. I have also prepared some helpers for you. Maybe you are interested in serving the sea goddess. Whether it is wealth or power, the sea temple can give you what you want." The belief of evil gods did not require love, but only awe and fear from the followers. The Naga Siren priest smiled and led Soren to the back of the hall. It seemed that after killing the first batch of targets, her mood had become better. More importantly, the group of people who were ready to move because of benefits were all honest. Fear could keep faith for a long time. In the future, no matter who wanted to betray the faith of the sea goddess, they would have to think about their end today. However, the deterrence last night was not enough. These guys had to be afraid of the consequences of betraying their faith. The killing should not stop. More blood must be used to tell them the price of betraying their faith. The reputation of the sea goddess had never been born out of kindness. Chapter 195. The Naga Siren priest led Soren down the temple. Soren calmly followed behind. Although he didn't get much slaughter EXP from last night's battle, Soren had obtained a special background ability. That was the advanced assassin ability, Heart of Slaughter. The main force of the Rosad Chamber of Commerce went to the Soros Islands for the arms trade. Most of the people who stayed behind were ordinary sailors and guards. Last night, he encountered 2 professions above grade 3, and the rest were all grade 1 or grade 2 or even ordinary sailors. To the current Soren, all enemies with a profession level of 10 grade 3, and below were simply a one-sided slaughter. Only enemies with a profession level of 15 grade 4, and above could cause him some trouble. Heart of Slaughter, background ability. You have become accustomed to death and blood after killing again and again. Ending a life is not difficult or scary for you. Hundreds of lives have been ended in your hands. You have begun to ignore death. In battle, you will awaken the ability of the Heart of Slaughter. This will make you have no mercy for your enemies. Even spells such as friendly spells will not affect your judgment. Permanent will +1. This was the prerequisite ability of the quasi-legendary ability, Slaughter Instinct. If he mastered the special ability, Slaughter Instinct, Soren would be able to retain his fighting ability unconsciously. For example, after being attacked by spells such as Confusion, Misdirection, Frenzy, and so on, even if Soren couldn't pass the test of spell immunity, his body and will would be controlled by the Slaughter Instinct, and automatically enter the state of killing. This ability was very difficult to train to obtain. Those who could master it were almost all strong people who walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. At present, he didn't know how to train to obtain it. Basically, there were very few people who mastered this ability and no one would announce it. Heart of Slaughter had 2 opportunities to advance. One was the background ability, Slaughterer, and the other was the evil faction's top killing ability, Deathwalker. 100 heads, 500 heads, 1000 heads. These 3 background abilities were independent. That was to say, obtaining the Slaughterer ability would not replace the Heart of Slaughter ability. The 2 background abilities could be stacked. The top killing background ability was Deathwalker. This was actually a legendary level background ability. Although it could improve a lot of abilities, it was also vulnerable to attacks from the good faction. There were actually many corresponding background abilities such as the good faction's Radiant Messenger, Drul's Nature's Balancer, and so on. There were actually a lot of background abilities. Many people born in the north were born with the background ability, Northlander, which gave them 1 point bonus in cold resistance and will. There was a fishy smell of seawater in the air. Soren seemed to have smelled something strange and could not help but frown slightly. The Naga Siren priest didn't seem to care. She led Soren all the way into the basement. There were many underground passages inside the sea temple. The interior of the building was completely erected in the sea. There were traces of artificial transformation that extended hundreds of meters underground. The sound of water dripping could be heard. The Naga Siren priest led Soren to a platform. Then she stopped in place and let out a low and strange chant. The seawater in front of them seemed to be boiling. 3 strange creatures gradually appeared in front of Soren, swimming out of the dark blue sea. "This is?" Soren's expression was a little surprised. He murmured, "This is the aura of the undead? What are they?" There were 3 twisted monsters in front of Soren. The first looked a bit like a shark man, but the skin on its body had some traces of decay. There were also shells and seaweed growing out of its flesh. The second creature looked a bit like a Naga Siren, but it only had a pair of arms. It looked similar to the previous one. It seemed to have died, but for some reason, it turned into an undead in the sea. The last one was a cold and evil banshee. Her predecessor should be a ghost, but for some reason she was transformed into a banshee. "Don't be surprised." The Naga Siren priest's mouth showed a hint of pride. She slowly said, "The sea is full of danger and death. The sea goddess also dominates the realm of death in the sea. They are all slaves of the sea goddess. Now they are your helpers." The group of betrayers seems to have drawn in the natives who believe in the storm. It is difficult for you to defeat them alone, so I will send stronger helpers to help you destroy them. Come with me. The Naga Siren priest reached out and grabbed Soren's arm, then opened a portal. The next moment, their figures appeared on a vast sea. Many reefs could be seen nearby, and something could be vaguely seen at the bottom of the sea. There were a large number of sunken ships near the island. This seemed to be an ancient route. Before the trade route of the Soros Islands was completely understood, many ships had hit the reefs and sunk here. Vaguely, there was a whirlpool-like force at the bottom of the sea. "Sa. Amo Luo." The Naga Siren priest sang in a strange tone. It seemed to be some kind of sea language. Even if Soren was a genius, he could not understand the language of the sea species, so he could not even understand the meaning of a word. However, he seemed to find that there was a power in this language. An invisible energy wave shook the sea, and then he could feel an energy field spreading out to a radius of hundreds of meters. One great white shark after another appeared in the vicinity. These huge sea monsters surrounded them in the distance. They were the most common dangerous creatures in the ocean. Small ships could be destroyed by them directly. The shark men domesticated a lot of great white sharks, some of which could even reach the size of whales. They were some kind of mutated sea monsters that were close to the legendary level of challenge. There seemed to be something moving on the bottom of the sea, followed by waves. Some creatures that looked like Naga Sirens but were not Naga Sirens appeared. They did not have much breath of living creatures. They looked like corpses that were mixed with marine algae creatures after death. They were a bit like modified ghouls, but they were much stronger than them. Rumble. There was a loud noise on the bottom of the sea, and then a mast broke out of the waves, followed by a very broken but intact ghost ship covered with seaweed and rotten wood. Ghosts appeared on the deck, and then they were sucked into the rotten wood of the ship by a huge force. Then the whole ghost ship began to repair as if it was resurrected. Some undead creatures that looked neither human nor ghost stood up, and then came to the deck of the ghost ship one by one. A fog rose from the sea around as if the smell of death had shrouded here. "This is the ghost fleet." The Naga Siren priest showed a cruel smile on the corner of her mouth. She handed something like a conch horn to Soren and said in a deep voice, "The sea goddess has scattered the ghost fleet to various temples. Although I can only mobilize one of them, it should be enough to help you kill those betrayers." As if pushed by an invisible force, the ghost ship with black sails quietly came in front of the two. The Naga Siren priest grabbed Soren's hand and took him to the ghost ship. Then she looked at the undead sailors in front of her, and a strange light appeared in her eyes. The undead sailors knelt down one by one, and the whole ghost ship was dead silent. Only the cold wind blew and Soren could not help but shiver. This ship had a life of its own. It was alive. It was a living creature that had been animated by legendary spells. It was a bit like the animated castle and animated thaling made by high-grade wizards. Soren felt very uncomfortable. It was as if he was standing on the corpse of a rotten dark creature. He could even feel the ghost ship breathing the smell of death. The Naga Siren priest handed the horn to Soren and said in a deep voice, "From today on, it will be under your command. Human. Don't let me down." Soren reached out and took the horn, and suddenly a dense stream of data appeared in front of his eyes. After a while, the stream of data in front of him gradually disappeared, and then a series of data appeared: creature name, ghost ship, dead man's voice, creature type, animated ghost ship, creature description. This is a battleship that sank hundreds of years ago. It woke up at the bottom of the sea, and the souls and wraiths of the dead gradually assimilated with it, turning it into a ghost ship that roams the sea. There are many legends about it, and finally it attracted the attention of the believers of the sea goddess. The legendary priests captured these ghost ships, and then secretly animated these ghost ships into low-level undead life forms under the divine power of the sea goddess. It has a simple consciousness and can restore itself like the undead. This ghost ship can sail in any sea, and its power is terrifying in the sea. Captain: Soren, temporary, sailor, drowned undead, 49 people, ocean wraith, 12 people, ocean specter, 72 people, naga banshee, 9 people, undead sharkman, 6 people, bound spirit of the dead speaker, 872 people. Equipment: drowning howl, ram, cannon of the dead, 24 pieces, ghost sails, boomerang cannons, 2 pieces. Skills: summon fog, ghost ship characteristics, underwater navigation, spirit binding characteristics, animated life, animated ropes, cursed hull, dead man's voice. Soren took the horn with some surprise, but there was a storm in his heart. Sure enough, the ghost fleet really existed. Chapter 196. Well, as soon as I finished writing the last chapter, someone found the model of the undrowned. Speaking of which, it's a pity that a girl's pictures are so bad. On the quiet sea, the dead man's voice sailed silently. Next to Soren was the proud Naga siren priest. She seemed to be satisfied with his shock after seeing the ghost ship. As the order was given, the dead man's voice suddenly shook, and then the deck of the ship began to separate. Invisible souls swam in the hull, and then the whole ghost ship began to sink slowly. The seawater came in from all directions, and a cable flew like a long snake, and then wrapped around Soren's arm. The first wave of the seawater hit. Soren's figure shook a little, and then his whole body entered the sea. The dead man's voice sailed on the bottom of the sea, and all kinds of sea creatures could be seen around it. The undrowned souls were scattered around the deck, maintaining the operation of the ghost ship. The speed of the seafloor sailing was not slow. The Naga siren priest looked around with satisfaction and then said, "This ghost ship will be on standby at any time. When the group of betrayers comes back, you will ambush them from the bottom of the sea." Understood. Soren nodded gently. It seemed that the power of the sea goddess was more powerful than he thought. The goddess not only touched the realm of life but also the realm of death. Although it was only limited to the sea, wasn't the thing she was plotting too much? What did she want? Soren suddenly had the illusion of seeing another queen of spiders rise. Because the area where he was active was not by the sea, he didn't know much about the sea goddess. But he knew that the goddess had always been active in the sea, and there were not many gods who could threaten her. Even if she lost her divine power and turned into a saint, how many people in the world could kill her in the sea? However, she didn't seem to have made any earth-shattering moves, did she? As a god with the sea as the core, the sea goddess also had a limitation. It was difficult for her to expand her faith to the land. This was also the reason why she had always been suppressed by the Storm Lord. Soren smelled a conspiracy, but he didn't know what the sea goddess was plotting. Outside the sea temple, Soren's figure emerged from the shadows and left the place without a sound. The core belief of the Storm Lord was in the tropical rainforest area of the Soros Islands, which was also a place where natural storms were frequent. Although there was a temple of the Storm Lord in Port Tylon, the power mobilized was definitely not comparable to the sea temple. After all, Port Tylon was an offshore island and was directly part of the sea. What the Temple of Storm could mobilize was limited to the local believers. If the Temple of Sea interfered slightly, they would not even be able to borrow the garrison power of Port Tylon. The rumor of the throat cutter was still brewing. There was a sense of panic spreading in Port Tylon. Many taverns were discussing who the terrible throat cutter was. Some people even swore that he was a legendary assassin. Perhaps even the Sea Temple thought that Soren was close to the legendary level, so they tried to rope him in and borrow his power to deal with the betrayers. After all, Soren still retained a lot of his strength even when he was hit by the legendary energy absorption. This was definitely a quasi-legendary combat power in the eyes of the natives. Although there were many legendary professions, there were not many of them scattered in various areas. The entire Port Tylon, as a transit station for coastal trade, only had 2 or 3 legendary professions, and that was counting the priests of the temple. What Soren did not expect was that he unexpectedly got a legendary point. The appearance of the throat cutter, folk rumor. In early November 1675 in Port Tylon, you accepted the task of the Sea Temple to clean up the betrayers. In this battle, you killed a large number of enemies and caused panic in Port Tylon. Rumors of the throat cutter began to appear in Port Tylon and gradually spread to the coastal areas. It won't be long before many people near the south coast will hear about the legend of the throat cutter. Legendary point +1? It seemed that the legendary battle was not the only way to get legendary points. The demigod vampire should also use this means of spreading fear to tell the world about his existence in the way of folk rumors. For the time being, there was no need to force legendary points. The higher the legendary point, the higher the possibility of attracting the attention of others. Soren did not intend to stand on the stage and compete with other forces for the time being. Naturally, he would not force himself to pursue legendary points. There was still some time before the betrayers returned. Port Tylon and the Soros Islands were about a week or 2. They had been on the road for nearly a week. Soren estimated that there was still about 7 or 8 days to prepare. The preparation was naturally to deal with high-grade spellcasters. Behind the Rosad Chamber of Commerce was the Duchess. She was born in an ancient sorcerer family. Such families were often very powerful, and the wealth and power accumulated for generations could not be underestimated. In the information given to Soren by the Naga Siren priest, there were 3 targets who were obviously spellcasters. However, because he had not seen them fight, he could not determine the spellcaster level of these 3 people. Naturally, there were more sorcerers in the sorcerer family, but there was also the possibility of wizards. High-grade spellcasters were very dangerous enemies, and Soren had to be very careful. It seemed that the Sea Temple had given him a lot of helpers, but in fact, these helpers could only be used to deal with low-level combat power. The undead sailors on the Dead Man's Voice were at most grade 2 or 3. They could be used to deal with ordinary people in low-grade professions, but there was no way to threaten high-grade spellcasters. If there was a priest with a higher profession level, he could directly use Dispel the Undead on the spot, and at least half of the undead sailors would die. Only those high-grade Naga Sirens and undead Sharkmen could resist the power of Dispel the Undead. In the end, the real combat power was on the ghost ship itself. The cannon it was equipped with was the key to killing the enemy. High-grade spellcasters were not easy to deal with. That was why the Sea Temple did not prepare a group of garbage fighters, because they could not even stand in front of high-grade spellcasters. It was possible that the Sea Temple would be directly exposed as the mastermind behind the scenes. Everyone knew that this might be the work of the Sea Temple, but this matter must not be shown with sufficient evidence. This was the hidden battle of the church. Soren returned to the hotel. After the stripping incident last time, the group of Amazons were obviously more honest, especially after the rumor of the throat cutter. They looked at Soren with fear and awe. These women must have suspected that Soren was the legendary throat cutter, but there was no evidence to prove that Soren was the one. And whether it was true or not, the Sea Temple was behind the throat cutter, which was one of the oldest forces in Port Tylon. Long before Port Tylon became a trading center, the Sea Temple had already developed on this island. Not everyone was a fanatic. Most people would not be willing to involve their lives in the battle of the church unless there were benefits that they could not refuse. The power of the Sea Temple had begun to show. The network of relations that had been operating in Port Tylon for generations directly suppressed the Storm Church. Unless the Soros Islands had a Storm Priest above the bishop level, or a legendary Storm Lord came to support, the Storm Temple in Port Tylon would always be suppressed by the Sea Temple, because this was the home ground of the Sea Goddess. In the room, Vivian's petite figure was suspended in the air. Soren raised his hand and patted his forehead. He gently jumped up and held the little girl in his arms, and then put her on the big bed. Although he had a very high will, he had not reached the peak state of the ascetic journey of thousands of miles. Fighting against the consciousness of the Dread Lord not only required a strong will, but also a kind of invincible and unstoppable momentum. Soren walked barefoot for thousands of miles in the extremely cold Frost Kingdom. What he accumulated was not only his will, but also his own momentum, which was a kind of power of belief. Now he lacked that kind of momentum. Without the kind of power of belief that broke out at the peak after being forced into a desperate situation, He was not confident enough to destroy the consciousness of the Dreadlord. That was why he was still waiting for an opportunity. Soren would only act when he had at least 80% confidence. The room quickly returned to its original state. Soren sat by the bed and gently stroked Vivian's long hair. The little girl's breathing was a lot more stable after he came back, and the things that were suspended in the air all fell back to the ground. Soren got a lot of slaughter EXP from last night's battle. Although the enemy was not very strong, the number of slaughter EXP accumulated during this period of time had reached more than 15,000. This amount of EXP was not enough for him to level up his Shadow Dancer profession, but it was enough for Soren to level up his Wizard profession to level 7. After leveling up, he would obtain a level 4 spell slot, which could be used to memorize the most important wizard spells, Stone Skin, and Greater Invisibility. Without a doubt, Soren's choice was Greater Invisibility. Because he had the legendary elemental stone, Earth, this equipment could activate a Stone Skin spell once every 3 days, which temporarily replaced Soren's need for defensive spells. Moreover, he had already learned Invisibility, so learning Greater Invisibility could greatly reduce the time needed to analyze the spell model. Moreover, Greater Invisibility was more useful than other spells of the same level. It was one of the spells that could increase the power of a rogue. The most important point. This was because Greater Invisibility would not reveal itself when launching an attack. Soren could fight with the enemy in the state of invisibility. He had been waiting for this spell for a long time. Chapter 197. The sky gradually darkened. Soren stood up and listened to the movement outside. He could vaguely hear the screams of men. This group of Amazon women took over more than half of the prostitutes in Port Tylon. Although they were also women, when they really stepped into the gray area, they would not be soft-hearted at all. And they also secretly controlled some of the more taboo areas, such as fair-skinned and beautiful men, strong men, and so on. These gray channels could even extend to other cities near the south coast. Many aristocratic women who were either old or lonely would definitely need some interesting activities. There were even some aristocratic widows in the south coast who directly raised male slaves. In the slave black market, they selected men as if they were livestock, including the objects below. These slaves were domesticated by cruel means, and it may also involve spiritual suggestion and so on. In the end, the slaves that were cultivated were very docile. This custom was a bit like the ancient Roman period, so the reputation of the aristocrats on the south coast was not very good. The torture was still going on. Soren's hearing was much better than before, so from time to time, he could hear faint screams from the basement. The Amazons seemed to have some fights with the locals. Recently, it seemed that many people had been caught and tortured. The bodies were dealt with through special channels, so the hotel looked very calm on the surface. Soren was a little worried about being involved in the conflict between them and the local gangs, so he was thinking about whether to move to the Sea Temple. It was undoubtedly very easy for the Naga Siren priest to settle him and Vivian. The Sea Temple's secular power was very strong. The screams stopped for a moment. Soren vaguely heard the woman's voice. It seemed that the target had died because of excessive punishment. Then there was the sound of the basement door opening, followed by 3 footsteps. One of the women's footsteps was very heavy. She should be wearing heavy armor. The standard configuration of female Amazons were all heavy infantry. This group of women dared to fight with heavy cavalry on the battlefield. Soren was still impressed by them. He was not interested in other things. When he closed the window, he looked at some sneaky stairs nearby and then began to study his own spells. A row of data appeared. The wizard profession has leveled up to level 7. Received 25 INT 20 plus INT 20 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 4 plus, con 21 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Without a doubt, Soren put his skill points into literacy. His highest basic skill at the moment was literacy, which had already reached 185 points. Most of it was from skill points and a small part of it was from reading books. Soren already had a good understanding of the language, customs, geography, and religion of human society. Although he wasn't as knowledgeable as a scholar, it would be easy for him to become a teacher in a noble family. Currently, secular knowledge could only raise one's lore to about 250 points. Any further would require mysticism knowledge, magic knowledge, supernatural knowledge, and planar knowledge to level up. Among them, if one wanted to reach 350 points in literacy, they would have to have a considerable amount of knowledge about the planes. In other words, he needed to travel across planes. Therefore, many wizards liked to travel to other planes, the most famous of which was the astral traveler. They were the top masters of knowledge and their footprints were all over the planes. This was not a profession. Astral traveler was a special background ability. It was a bit like a title. Soren settled his thoughts, then took out a thick stack of white paper and began to analyze the spell model of greater invisibility. He had already gotten this spell from the Sea Temple. The priest thought that he needed to use the spell scroll to fight, but she probably didn't think that Soren would use it to memorize. Soren didn't trust the Naga Siren priest very much, so he still had a lot of cards up his sleeve. The priest didn't even know that he had a high wizard level. The priest even thought that Soren was a quasi-legendary assassin because he liked to fight with poison. This was the assassin's favorite way to fight. Part-time jobs were the easiest to disguise. There were wizards who disguised as warriors or warriors who disguised as wizards. P.S. For example, Gandalf, a standard berserker who was a gray-robed wizard. In Soren's memory there was a non-native character. That guy always made people think that he was a wizard, but when he pulled out his sword, others found out that he was actually a sword saint. He was a very powerful and dangerous guy. With the super explosive power of a sword saint, coupled with the wizard's stone skin defense, and the support of comprehensive spells, his combat power was even more terrifying than Soren's current transformation. Unfortunately, he died a little too early. This guy single-handedly fought more than 10 enemies of the same level, and in the end he was killed by a dimensional anchor. He fought against 12 enemies and killed more than half of them. It was a brilliant record. Soren knew that he might not be able to do it now. Those who could become sword saints were very powerful, but they all died too early. In Soren's memory, there didn't seem to be many sword saints who had lived for a long time. Even the legendary sword saint who was worshipped by many in the Battle of the Golems was beaten to death in the end. Perhaps the legendary wizards couldn't tolerate these people who could break through their greater defensive force field with a single strike. If Soren's enemy had a sword saint, he would probably kill them first. The existence of a sword saint was a threat. Soren buried himself in analyzing the spell model. The sheets of white paper were filled with densely packed symbols. Level 4 spells were more difficult than any spell he had learned before. If he didn't learn invisibility at the beginning, he probably wouldn't even have a clue. Greater invisibility was a multi-layered spell model. The biggest difference between it and invisibility was that invisibility would be revealed after an attack, which meant that the spell effect would disappear. However, greater invisibility was still effective after an attack, and the user would still be invisible. This meant that it was quite difficult to learn. It was much more difficult than other level 4 spells of the same level. Soren could only slowly break it down and calculate the individual spell models for analysis. After the initial analysis of the spell model, Soren's progress began to speed up gradually because the model of greater invisibility was developed from invisibility. However, invisibility was a single spell model, while greater invisibility was an overlapping composite type, which was equivalent to automatically activating the effect of invisibility after an attack. This was a very high-end spell circuit system. This was the dividing line for difficult spells. Starting from level 4 spells, the difficulty of learning would increase exponentially. In the end, it would even extend to the fields of astrology, planes, space, and so on. The night passed quickly. Soren rubbed his forehead and stood up. It was almost dawn outside. He picked up a thick stack of white paper and flipped through it. Then he destroyed some of them. His progress in analyzing the spell model was only about 10%. Although it would definitely speed up as his research deepened, he didn't have much time left. Soren looked at Vivian next to him, raised his hand and stroked her cheek. Then he got up and walked downstairs. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. Soren noticed that the Amazon guard at the door had an extra wound on her arm. It wasn't there last night. There was a battle. Because he was focused on studying the spell model, Soren lowered his perception of the surroundings. It seemed that these women had fought with some forces last night. The erotic industry was always a gray area. The Amazons took such a big piece of cake, so it was normal for someone to trouble them from time to time. Soren simply took something to eat and then returned to the room. He wasn't interested in poking his nose into other people's business. Soren ate a little, then carefully fed Vivian some water and began to study the spell model again. The little girl basically didn't need to eat. At first, Soren tried to feed her. Unfortunately, she didn't seem to need anything except for drinking water occasionally. Her little face was still very rosy and she didn't feel hungry at all. In this regard, Vivian seemed to be stronger than he was now. Being able to completely sustain her own consumption with energy was already a sign of the legendary realm. Time passed little by little. Soren was busy studying greater invisibility. Occasionally, the Naga Siren priest would send him messages, and he went out several times during this period. The Amazons seemed to be fighting with a local force. There were sounds of killing and fighting in the streets at night. Soren's move to destroy the Rosad Chamber of Commerce seemed to have caused a new round of shuffling in Port Tylon. The Amazons had a larger territory. They killed a lot of people and got a bigger cake. It seemed that some people foresaw that the Rosad Chamber of Commerce would never recover from this setback. So many forces were eager to swallow up their trade shares in various fields. Even the forces that belonged to the Church of Storms did not have the slightest pity at this time because they didn't necessarily look up to those who had betrayed their faith. This kind of betrayal for greater interest would make people feel repulsed. Soren killed a lot of people that night. But because of his killing, Port Tylon had more than 10 times the number of casualties in the next week. There were even small-scale naval battles occurring in the coastal areas. Chaos arose. The guards finally couldn't stand it anymore and began to intervene in the competition for the interests of the major forces, allowing them to maintain the superficial order. So the killing began to spread at night. As for how many people died, it had nothing to do with Soren. He was happy that he had learned greater invisibility in a week. At the same time, he received news that the Rosad Chamber of Commerce's fleet had begun to return the next day. It was time for the ghost ship to set off. Soren would intercept them when they returned and bury them all in the sea. Chapter 198. The atmosphere in Port Tylon was a little tense. Soren's arrival broke the original order here, making the killing and chaos more frequent. There was no need to say much about what happened in Port Tylon during this time. It could be seen from the changes in the sea around Port Tylon. The corpses thrown into the sea, and even sharks were attracted to the shallow sea area. One could imagine how many people died in Port Tylon during this time. The destruction of a force meant that there would be more benefits to be distributed. More benefits would attract more people to compete for them, and then there would be more killings causing more forces to be destroyed. Then some forces would become stronger and stronger, swallowing up most of the benefits in Port Tylon. There was obviously someone behind this. The guards were obviously pressured, so the chaos and killing continued to escalate, and many nearby forces were destroyed in the turmoil. As for the final winner, there was no need to think about it. The first must be the Sea Temple, the second must be the Storm Temple, and the third must be the Amazons. A lot of things happened during this time. The Storm Temple seemed to have compromised with the Sea Temple. The Rosad Chamber of Commerce was completely abandoned. The believers of the Storm Temple got the territories of other forces as compensation. The Sea Temple controlled almost half of Port Tylon. The Amazons relied on their strong fighting power to rise in the two churches. Half of the street where Soren now lived was their territory. The original owner had disappeared, and the Amazons were going to open up the street and make it into a large trade transit station. Right. A Storm Lord had appeared. Without her appearance, the Amazons would not be able to eat such a large piece of cake. The Sea Temple. Soren's figure appeared in the hall. The Naga Siren priest seemed to have been waiting for his arrival. The other party's expression seemed a little excited. After seeing Soren's figure appear, she immediately said in a deep voice, "There's a change in the plan. The group of betrayers has made a new move. Your task now is to find a way to rob their cargo ship." Soren couldn't help but frown. The sudden change in the mission after the target appeared made him unhappy, but he still said in a deep voice, "What happened? Why did you suddenly change the plan?" A cruel smile appeared on the Naga Siren priest's face as she slowly said, "This group of betrayers went to the Soros Islands to trade in the name of the Church of Storms. However, he didn't expect them to be traders who would do anything for the sake of benefits. These guys used conspiracy and poison to slaughter an indigenous tribe, and then took away the gold mine wealth controlled by the indigenous people. The traders looted the aboriginal tribe and shipped all their wealth back to the tribe. There's news that their ships are filled with gold and jewels." The Naga Siren priest handed a scroll to Soren. When Soren opened it, she told him the whole process. It turned out that after this group of traders changed their faith and joined the Church of Storms, they had indeed opened up a situation in the Soros Islands. The faith of the Storm Lord was spread all over the Soros Islands. With the banner of this faith, they could trade with almost any native town along the coast. Things were supposed to be that simple. These guys would return after making some money from the trade. However, what they didn't expect was that one of the indigenous tribes seemed to trust them too much and even exposed the huge gold mine that the tribe secretly controlled. There were many scattered mines on the Soros Islands, including many gold and silver mines. This tribe was one of the indigenous clans that occupied a relatively rich gold mine. It was said that their chief directly used pure gold to build a throne that weighed nearly half a ton. In order to show their wealth and strength, they also entertained them with a large number of pure gold utensils. However, they didn't expect that this would also lead to disaster. There were believers of the god of plague and disease in the traders' caravan. This fallen one used a secret poison to put into the water source, and with the power of plague and disease, he directly defeated the indigenous tribe. What happened next was needless to say. The traders slaughtered the indigenous tribe, then looted their wealth and finally burned down their gathering place. How much did they get? The information in Soren's hands didn't make it clear, but it was certainly a huge amount of wealth that was enough to move the Sea Temple. The gold that these guys looted was calculated in tons. The gold wealth that the indigenous tribes had accumulated for generations, as well as all kinds of gold and silver utensils, jewelry and treasures, were all loaded by them. They even threw away a large number of Soros Island's copper coins, because the weight of the ships simply couldn't hold these cheap copper coins. Soren couldn't estimate how much money they got. He could only roughly guess that the wealth they looted was more than 500,000 Kindler. A rich indigenous tribe that owned a gold mine. The gold and silver they looted from the tribe alone could reach more than 10 tons. These guys made a fortune. The wealth they looted even moved the Sea Temple. For some reason the news was leaked. Now, not only the Sea Temple knew that they had plundered a lot of wealth, but even the pirates near the Soros Islands and Shipwreck Bay all knew this amazing news. The fleet of the traders had changed their course, but the pirates in all directions seemed to have spread out a big net and surrounded them from almost all the routes to the Soros Islands. Not only did the Sea Temple move, but even the Amazon pirates were also very tempted. The three pirate kings near the Soros Islands were almost all out, looking for their traces. This wealth was too amazing. Soren was surprised when he estimated the approximate amount. If he could get this wealth, he could go to the Wizard City and get a set of legendary equipment. The temple also needed money. No matter which god's temple it was, it needed a lot of wealth to maintain its operation. The Sea Temple in front of him had at least a few hundred years of history. It was all accumulated bit by bit with money. The magic blessing and divine blessing inside all needed money to arrange the magic circle. One of the most important tasks of the priests was to make money and then develop faith. The gods' temples rarely hoarded wealth, but they also needed wealth because wealth was very important in the secular world. Wealth could be used to strengthen the church's influence, and wealth could directly cultivate a large number of believers. Wasn't the great influence of the God of Light because he would help the poor every year? Where did the money come from? Wealth may not be the most crucial part of faith, but it was definitely an indispensable part. One was a magnificent, solemn and dignified temple, and the other was a dilapidated temple with broken bricks and tiles. It was obvious which one would attract more believers without much thought. Believing in this God could get alms every month, but believing in the God would give you nothing every month. For the lowest level of civilians there was almost no choice. They were just ordinary people and they could only see what was in front of them. Even if it was the evil God's temple, it could easily expand its influence with huge wealth. Whether it was recruiting people to suppress other churches, or secretly cultivating their own forces, these things could not be separated from the support of wealth. However, the church also had its own rules. Many times, it could not interfere too much with the secular world. The church needed wealth, but it could not act recklessly. After all, the gods needed faith and wealth was only a tool to maintain faith. The Naga Siren priest wanted this wealth. This money was enough for the Sea Temple to expand into a great temple. Whether it was the influence in the coastal areas, the reward of the sea goddess, or the divine power gathered by the temple, they were all things that she could not refuse. After the Sea Temple expanded, she could completely suppress the Storm Temple. Even if she had the support of the Great Temple in the future, she would not be afraid of any Storm Lord. The temple was a bit like a wizard tower. It was just that it was not as powerful as a wizard tower because the temple still operated divine power. This was why Amber City was destroyed but the temple area was intact. Soren was silent for a long time before he said in a deep voice, "We don't have enough manpower." If the news has spread among the pirates, just relying on a ghost ship to fight for it is simply suicide. Those betrayers have not been found until now, there must be someone behind them. This money is probably worth the Duchess' personal trip. Moreover, the 3 pirate kings of the Soros Islands are not easy to deal with, and almost all of them are not ordinary people. I am worried that the big octopus will also appear. Your Excellency should know who I am talking about, right? That monster was the enemy of the Sea Temple, and it was the incarnation of the sea goddess who personally came to banish it. It seems to have a hobby of collecting wealth. There are admirers among the pirates. The possibility of it appearing is too high. Soren pulled out a nautical chart. After thinking for a moment, he raised his finger and pointed to a place, which seemed to be the location of an island, and said in a deep voice, "According to the information I have heard, there seems to be a black dragon in this position. It has been secretly maintaining contact with Shipwreck Bay in human form. If it knows that there are 5 big ships full of gold and silver sailing on the sea, it is hard to believe that it will not be tempted." The Naga Siren priest was silent. She looked up at Soren in surprise and seemed to be thinking about something. Then she said in an unquestionable tone, "I will send more people to help you. If the enemy is very strong, I will summon the nearby Naga Sirens. If necessary, I will also do it myself. The sea goddess is watching us. We don't have to fear anyone on the sea. This wealth cannot fall into the hands of others." In the evening, Soren slowly walked out of the Sea Temple. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. He murmured in a voice that only he could hear, "Totem Spirit. How did those guys defeat the Totem Spirit? Why didn't the Naga Siren priest mention it? Does she think that I don't know that the indigenous tribes worship spirits?" Chapter 199. In the evening, Soren left the hotel with little Vivian in his arms. Because of the last show of force, the group of Amazons had unintentionally respected him a lot. The assassin also put away his excessive curiosity. From the beginning to the end, he didn't ask why Vivian was in a deep slumber. Assassins were people who were full of secrets. One shouldn't know too many secrets. The more one knew, the easier it would be for them to be killed. It was like the Naga Siren priest had known for a long time that Soren had a sleeping little girl with him, but she had never asked about it. Secrets may not necessarily bring benefits, but they could easily lead to danger. Especially an assassin's secret. Since he decided to go to sea, Soren naturally couldn't leave Vivian in the hotel. He was also worried about the group of Amazons. So he was going to transfer Vivian to the Sea Temple. The Sea Temple controlled nearly half of the temple area. It was very easy to find a place to settle Vivian. He didn't know how long the little girl would be asleep. Soren felt that Vivian's awakening should be directly related to his integration with the divinity of fear. The last time she woke up was almost after Soren had finished devouring the divinity. In an old house outside the Sea Temple. Soren gently put Vivian on the bed, then reached out his palm to hold her little hand and said in a low voice, "Control your divine power as much as possible. Don't easily expose the identity of the child of fear. I'll be back soon. It won't take long for you to wake up. I promise." Although Vivian showed no signs of waking up from beginning to end, Soren could feel that she still had a perception of the outside world. That was to say, Vivian could hear him. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why the little girl automatically opened a divine protection as soon as he left. After Soren came back, she quickly withdrew the energy protection field. Her power was still in her body, but her consciousness seemed to have entered a deep sleep for some reason, and there had been no signs of waking up. Soren covered Vivian with a soft blanket and lay down beside her. He would be going out to sea tomorrow, so he needed a good rest. Sea Temple. The figure of the Naga Siren priest stood in front of a blue sea. The bottom of the Sea Temple was connected to the underground sea and could directly enter the sea from here. The sea in front of her rippled slightly, and then a long and narrow creature that looked like a giant sea snake appeared. It swam to the front of the Naga Siren priest little by little, then slowly stood up and came to the high platform under the Sea Temple. At this time its appearance became clear. It was a strong and ferocious male Naga guard. Its tail was longer than the Naga Siren priest's, and its stout arm held a trident. There were few traces of humanoid features on its face, unlike the female Naga Siren who had more or less feminine facial contours. The Naga guard was about 6 or 7 meters long. When it stood up it was nearly 4 meters tall. Its muscles were very developed and it looked very oppressive. It bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency. The Naga Siren tribe in the nearby sea has been summoned, and they will soon send warriors to respond." The Naga Siren priest nodded slightly, and there was a satisfied smile on her face. She said in a deep voice, "Very good, Didanis. You will command the summoned warriors. We must get those treasures this time. The storm temple also seems to be moving. This wealth cannot fall into their hands. It will only strengthen our enemies." The Storm Lord has always been coveting the great sea goddess and wants to get his hands on the sea. The male Naga siren nodded and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency. I don't understand why you want to give the command of the dead man's voice to that human. Although he is a powerful guy, he is only one person after all. Besides, his origin is unknown and we can't fully trust him." The Naga siren priest frowned and looked at him. Her expression became a little strange, and there seemed to be a cruel smile on her face. She said coldly, "Are you questioning my decision? Didanis. Don't try to guess my decision with your stupid head. That human is an assassin close to the legendary realm. Such a person is not much weaker than a legendary profession in battle. He is worthy of our use. Besides, after I removed the energy absorption technique from him, I felt the breath of the legendary realm on him. He should have mastered some legendary level abilities. I think he is not far from becoming a legendary assassin. In the past 200 or 300 years, there have been very few legendary assassins. If he can be loyal to the Sea Temple, our enemies will wake up from their nightmares. Legendary assassin. If used to assassinate a member of a hostile force, it would definitely be a complete nightmare." The Naga siren priest seemed to see Soren turning into a sharp blade to sweep away her dissidence. She could not help but smile and said slowly, "As for loyalty? There is no absolute loyalty in this world. As long as we can give him the benefits he wants, he will be able to serve us. This person has a lot of secrets and he definitely needs our help. Moreover, he seems to have a little girl who is sleeping. Although I did not test his secrets, I can see that he cares about this little girl very much. The relationship between the two is very close. He is under the energy absorption technique, and the little girl is probably under some strange spell. If necessary, the little girl can also be our tool. I don't think he wants anything to happen to the little girl, right? As long as he has a weakness, we can control him." The Naga siren priest showed a cruel smile, looked at the male Naga siren guard in front of her and said, "There are some things that you don't need to ask. Now, send out the Sharkman scouts to find the traces of the group of betrayers. We must find those guys first, otherwise this wealth may attract more competitors." The male Naga siren guard bent down gently, and then his whole body dived into the sea. The Naga siren priest returned to the back of the sea temple. She swam to a pool and gently chanted a spell. The water in front of her rippled like waves, and the figure of Soren gradually appeared. Next to him was Vivian, who was still sleeping. A strange light appeared in the eyes of the Naga siren priest and she murmured, "Who are they? That little girl seems to be a natural sorcerer? Recently, a lot of powerful guys have appeared. It seems that a group of adventurers have returned from the abyss? The sea goddess has not responded to my prayers recently. Is something big going to happen? It seems that I have to speed up the preparation." The Naga siren priest slowly closed her eyes, and then her whole body sank into the sea. Although the priests of the sea goddess had great power, they could not directly mobilize the sea races. This was because the secular and theocracy maintained a relative boundary. The kingdom of the sea creatures was a bit similar to the kingdom of humans. Few temples would directly intervene in the internal affairs of the kingdom. This was because the kingdom was a very short thing, but the gods had eternal life. They did not want to be affected by the kingdom that rose and fell in hundreds of years. The fact that the Naga siren priest could mobilize the Naga sirens in the nearby sea meant that her status in the secular world was not low. It was possible that she was the royal family of the Naga sirens. If the members of the royal family did not have the right of inheritance, they would often become priests of the sea goddess. The sea was surrounded by a fog. Soren's figure appeared 300 meters below the sea. He stood on the deck of the dead man's voice and looked at the underwater world in front of him. The sea drowned him, but it did not affect him at all. This was because he wore a badge on his chest that allowed him to breathe easily at the bottom of the sea. The deck of the dead man's voice was full of sailors. The Naga sirens wandered in the hull, and the undead sharks were responsible for patrolling. There were a large number of bound spirits on this ghost ship. They were the souls that died directly or indirectly near the ghost ship. They could not participate in the battle. They were just forcibly sucked into the mast and sails of the ship. The power source of the ghost ship was these bound spirits. There were more than 800 or 900 of them. The real combat power was the undead drowned, the Naga sirens, the wraiths, and the undead sharks. Soren silently calculated the distance of the sea and the distance they sailed. The ghost ship was not suitable to be exposed to the eyes of ordinary people, so the ghost ship left the shallow sea area from the bottom of the sea. Rise. Soren frowned and looked at the fish around him. Because of the death breath on the dead man's voice, the fish scattered directly after encountering them and fled in all directions in embarrassment. With Soren's order, the sailors began to control the ghost ship to rise. A little light appeared in front of their eyes as they slowly rose. Then the blue sea appeared above their heads. With a loud rumbling sound, the ghost ship rushed out from the bottom of the sea. Soren looked around and said in a deep voice, "Summon the fog. Don't let others see us." Wisps of gray mist filled the air. With the ghost ship as the center, everything within a few hundred meters was shrouded in fog. This was the ghost ship's innate ability. The sea area where they appeared was often shrouded in fog. The fog on the sea today was not small. As the ghost ship's fog spread, everything nearby became hazy. The ship sailed silently on the sea. The ghosts did not like to be directly exposed to the sun. These undead sailors were indeed very powerful, but their weakness was too obvious. "Captain." A half-real Naga siren came to Soren and said in a sharp voice, "I found the breath of a living person nearby." It was the Naga siren that he first saw. It was an independent undead creature, not bound to the ghost ship. Living person? They met other people so soon? Soren frowned and came to the helmsman's position. He then took out his binoculars to observe. He could vaguely see a large ship near an island. From afar he could see the symbol on the flagpole. It was a hollow skull with a sword and a sword under it. This was the most commonly used pirate symbol. If one did not join a special force among pirates, ordinary pirates would use such a symbol. To use a special pirate flag, one must use their own name. Otherwise, they might be attacked by other pirates because of the wrong flag. This was an unspoken rule. It may seem insignificant, but it was indeed related to life. In the Central Plains there was a custom of dragon boat racing. Generally, a flag would be hung on the dragon boat. This flag could not be hung randomly. If it was hung randomly, it might attract others to come and pull it out. In many places the black flag was a taboo. There were once serious casualties caused by hanging a black flag on a dragon boat. In the end, the dragon boat racing was banned for many years. When the dragon boat was driven again, the same flag would be issued. If anyone dared to hang a black flag, the armed police would personally send people to pull it out. They were afraid that in the end people would be beaten to death. Naturally, such things did not exist in this world. However, there were many rules about flags on the sea. Whether it was pirates, chamber of commerce, gangs, etc., hanging a flag was a very serious matter. The rules here were piled up by human lives. In Soren's memory, there was someone who hung a flag indiscriminately. In the end, the entire guild was wiped out by pirates. Even their base on land was kicked down overnight. There were almost no survivors. That guy was also looking for trouble. He actually hung a flag similar to the Pirate King. From this point of view, the dangerous people in this world who made a living on land, sea, and rivers were really a bit like bandits in the jungle. Some rules could not be violated. Hanging a flag among pirates was like messing with the emblem of the temple. If you did not know, you were lucky. If you knew, it was normal for you to be skinned alive. Looks like an ordinary pirate? Soren frowned and pondered for a moment. Then he shouted, "Prepare for battle." The pirate ship in front of them should be ordinary pirates who made a living on the sea. Those who made a name for themselves had their own flag. Generally, few people would disguise themselves on it. If they were really pirates with a name, they would definitely hang it as much as possible because it could avoid a lot of trouble. Some special flags were even extraordinary items. After hanging it, even sea monsters would not easily attack it. Soren once took on a mission to sacrifice a flag. However, the place was not the south coast. The target of the flag sacrifice was a legendary sea monster. Sacrificial spirit war flag, Captain? The Naga siren came in front of Soren and said in a harsh voice, "They don't seem to be our target. Are we going to attack them?" Soren frowned and looked at her, then nodded and said, "Yes. We need to conduct a battle test." "Forget it. You guys get ready for battle. I will deal with them myself. You guys are responsible for covering me. Be ready to board the ship and fight at any time." Soren wanted to use them to practice because he had not experienced a sea battle for a long time. Fighting was not just about casually slashing people with swords. Different environments required different ways of fighting. These were all things that needed to be known in one's heart. Fighting on the surface of the sea or on a ship was completely different from fighting on land. Not to mention underwater battles, just fighting on a ship was not simple. This was because the ship's hull would sway, and the fighting environment was much narrower. If you were not careful, you could capsize in a ditch. There were many people who died because of carelessness in the past. Soren was a very cautious person. He did not want to die unknowingly because the ship was not suitable for fighting. Moreover, he also needed to test his fighting skills. In the past, he could run on the water when he was fighting on the sea. He was almost at the legendary level. Now, he did not have so many abilities to support him. His fighting style had also changed a lot. Clang. Soren looked at the undead around him and frowned slightly. Then he ordered in a deep voice, "Get the ship close. Don't get too close. Come back when you get my signal." What? Soren jumped directly into the water, leaving the Naga siren, who was a little stunned, in place. Fly. Greater invisibility. After enough distance, Soren's eyes lit up, and then he began to cast continuously to test his fighting power on the sea. He began to calculate the time. Soren's brain began to operate like a sophisticated instrument. Under the cover of the fog, his figure directly flew out of the sea. Greater invisibility was blessed on him. Soren directly disappeared in the air, leaving no trace in place. With a simple trick, Soren's wet clothes dried, and then he began to approach the pirate ship. Soren flew about 100 meters in the air. His flying speed was not very fast. With the blessing of greater invisibility, he could not see any trace at all. Because he was now flying in stealth mode. Because he did not have enough abilities, Soren could not cast spells to fight in the flying state because his main energy was maintaining fly. There was not much time. Whether it was fly or greater invisibility, the duration was calculated in terms of minutes. Soren had to pursue the greatest result in the duration of the spell. The distance was getting closer little by little. Everything on the pirate ship came into Soren's vision. He saw 20 or 30 pirate sailors on the deck, the lookout on the mast, the helmsman in charge of steering the ship, and so on. These pirates were not very weak. They were stronger than many city guards. They belonged to the second-grade professions, but most of them had the ability of warriors. Because of their pirate career, they were inclined to the fighting style of a wandering swordsman. Among all the enemies of bandits, the pirates' fighting power was the strongest. They were completely superior to the bandits. Only the desert bandits could be compared to them. A minute passed. Soren's figure began to descend. He entered the state of stealth, but it was still greater invisibility that maintained his invisibility. The distance gradually decreased. Soren stopped about 10 meters above the pirate ship. The light passed through his body. Unless one stared at his position carefully, they would not be able to see anything different. The enemies in front of him were very clear. The strong pirates were bored on the deck. The ship's anchor seemed to have been thrown down. These people seemed to be waiting for something. Soren continued to descend. Then, he gently landed in a corner of the ship where there was no one. 5 meters in front of him was a pirate who was drinking. Unfortunately, the pirate did not notice him at all. Kill the important targets first. Soren glanced at the enemies in front of him. Finally, he locked onto a one-eyed pirate who seemed to be the vice-captain. He quietly snuck over and then suddenly stabbed the pirate's back with his curved sword. Pucci. Blood splattered. The one-eyed pirate who was yelling at his subordinates looked at his chest in disbelief. His heart had been pierced. This third-grade pirate died on the spot. Enemy? A large group of pirates panicked. Then there was the sound of swords being pulled out. They could not see anything in front of them. They could only see a curved sword emerging from the chest of the one-eyed pirate. Then the curved sword was pulled out. Then everything in front of them was still empty. Soren shook off the blood on the blade. At the moment of the attack, he revealed a trace of himself. Then he disappeared into the air again. This was greater invisibility. When he was in the state of greater invisibility, he would not be dispelled when attacking the enemy. Pucci. A head was cut off by Soren. A pirate with a beard heard the whistling sound of the sword, but he could not see the trace of the sword. He clearly heard the sound of the wind and felt the slight outline of the enemy in front of him. However, he could not see the direction of the sword. He could only block randomly. Then, in the next moment, his head was cut off. 3 throwing knives were shot out. The moment the throwing knives left Soren's palm, they revealed a trace. Unfortunately, the enemy had no time to dodge. Thump, thump, thump. Streaks of blood appeared. Soren came and went as if there was no one around. In the blink of an eye, 5 people were killed by him. The enemy could not even determine the position of his attack. They could only feel a vague and hazy trajectory moving around them at high speed. This fear made their morale extremely low. Some people were completely stunned as if they had seen a ghost. Some people even threw their weapons. Clang, clang. Soren waved his sword to block the weapons that were thrown at him. At the same time he revealed his approximate position. He suddenly jumped, directly jumping to a height of 5 or 6 meters. The sturdy cable connected to the mast suddenly sank a lot. The outline of a hand holding the cable could be seen, but the figure of a person could not be seen. Soren flew down from the air. With a curved sword in each hand, he slashed horizontally. In a large amount of blood, 5 people were killed in a row. Large amounts of blood gushed out. At this time, bloody footprints could be seen on the ground. Soren's figure was still very hazy. The blood on his body was also covered by the greater invisibility spell. However, the enemy could vaguely see that he was moving. Unfortunately, they discovered it too late. 3 minutes later, Soren's figure stood in a pool of blood. There were more than 20 corpses around him. There were a series of footprints on the ground, but he was still invisible. The greater invisibility spell lasted for about 6 minutes. Soren shook off the blood on his sword, then glanced at the cabin expressionlessly. He suddenly grabbed a corpse and smashed it into the cabin. Then the 2 swords flashed with a cold light and cut the 2 enemies guarding the back of the cabin in half. Blood covered his clothes. The effect of the greater invisibility spell seemed to have weakened. Soren's figure gradually became hazy and translucent. The effect of the spell seemed to have weakened a little. However, this was no longer important to Soren because he found that he seemed to have the ability to kill all the pirates on this ship. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.